hint of surprise flashed through the woman's eyes upon hearing this, but she then smiled and said, "Indeed, we will require you to do something for us in the vast glacial realm. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Li, even though you're not a member of our 13 heavenly cloud races, we are both relatively important figures in our respective races, so it won't be an issue for us to grant you a spot to enter the vast glacial realm. As such, we'll be giving you this splendid opportunity in return for your help. What do you think?" A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face. After a long while, he finally sighed. "I haven't reached a bottleneck in my cultivation, so entering the vast glacial realm won't do me much good. On top of that, I can enter the vast glacial realm without any additional effort on your part, Senior." "You can enter the vast glacial realm without our help? Surely not. I can see that you're in disguise right now, but I'm certain that you're not a being from one of our 13 races. How can an outsider like you have the right to enter the vast glacial realm?" A hint of surprise appeared on Duan Tianren's face as he spoke. A flash of realization suddenly appeared in the crystal woman's eyes, and she chuckled. "Don't be quick to jump to conclusions, Brother Duan. If we're talking about outsiders, then there really is one who was granted the right to enter the vast glacial realm recently. I think we need to stop referring to you as fellow Taoist Li. Isn't that right, fellow Taoist Han?" Han Li heaved an internal sigh upon hearing this. As expected, these two beings were too powerful to be fooled by his disguise. Thankfully, from the sounds of it, they could tell that he was in disguise, but they still couldn't glean his true appearance. After a brief pause to collect his thoughts, Duan Tianren mused, "Fellow Taoist Han, now that you mention it, I did hear someone in my race tell me about this. There was a certain outsider who activated a vast glacial beige around a year ago, and he seemed to be requesting access to our super teleportation formation at the time as well. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D45F, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 1D452, letter 1D44F, letter 1D4B, 8, letter 1D45C, letter 1D62E. Indeed, it appears that this fellow Taoist Han and fellow Taoist Li are one and the same," the woman said with a smile. In that case, he has to enter the vast glacial realm anyway. That'll save us a lot of hassle." Duan Tianren was quite elated to hear this. "I still don't know what you'd like me to do, and on top of that, I've accepted another mission from your stone cocoon race as well, so it'll be quite difficult for me to juggle two missions at once in the vast glacial realm," Han Li said in a hesitant manner. "Oh, you're talking about gathering the tool refinement material, right? Don't worry, that won't take you long at all, so it definitely won't delay you. If you have to choose between one or the other, then naturally prioritize the task that fellow Taoist Kai and I are assigning you. Even if you don't manage to gather the tool refinement material, our stone cocoon race wouldn't hold you accountable as long as I have something to say about it," Duan Tianren said in a proud manner. "As for what task we're going to be assigning you, seeing as it's assured that you'll be entering the vast glacial realm, it couldn't hurt to divulge some of the details to you. What do you think, Brother Duan?" the crystal woman asked. "If you think it's fine, then go right ahead. I have no objections," Duan Tianren replied. "It's actually very simple. We need you and two other beings who also possess the essence Fu's body to combine your powers in order to open a hidden restriction in the vast glacial realm, then secure a few times from within the restriction. Those items will assist Brother Duan and me greatly in our heavenly tribulations, and if you succeed, our survival will essentially be ensured for the next few tens of thousands of years," the woman elaborated in a serious manner. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this, and he couldn't help but think of Qing Yuanzi, who was hiding in the infernal river. Despite his extraordinary cultivation base, he had no choice but to reside in a space outside of the main realm in order to delay his next major heavenly tribulation. At their cultivation bases, dying of old age was no longer a concern, but the major heavenly tribulations that were guaranteed to befall them periodically was something that they had to try to avoid or delay at all cost. It seemed that even after reaching the body integration stage, one still had to toil away in the ever-present hamster wheel of cultivation. Han Li heaved an internal sigh as he came to that conclusion. The crystal woman continued, "This restriction is something we discovered in the vast glacial realm back before we reached the holy race, and I wasn't able to open it at the time, but I was lucky enough to learn some information about it through other avenues. There are a few items in there that are next to useless for upper race beings like you, but they're life-saving treasures to holy race beings like us. Seeing as this restriction lies in the vast glacial realm, then doesn't that mean it would have been left behind by an immortal? I've heard that many beings have perished within various restrictions in the vast glacial realm. Are you really certain that we'll be able to bypass it unscathed, Senior?" Hanli asked in a cautious manner. Perhaps my combat prowess is slightly inferior compared to that of the average holy race being, but in terms of mastery and restrictions, I can confidently say that I'm ranked within the top 5 beings in all of the heavenly cloud races. At the time, I painstakingly studied the restriction to find that it had existed for countless years, and the vast majority of its power had already faded. Otherwise, I would have completely given up on it from the get-go. Do you not believe me, fellow Taoist? The woman asked with a meaningful look in her eyes. I wouldn't dare, Hanli hurriedly replied. It would only be natural for you to be skeptical under these circumstances. Rest assured, I may be a woman, but I'm not so petty as to begrudge you for doubting my words. I spent over 1,000 years to devise this method to break the restriction using the powers of 3 beings with essence-effused bodies, and there's at least a 70% to 80% chance that it would succeed. As for the other 2 beings with essence-effused bodies, they've been here in Cloud City this entire time. One of them was naturally born with the Constitution and is currently a guest member of our crystal race. The other acquired the essence-effused body through assistance from Bother Duin. If they were to join forces with you, I'm sure the 3 of you will be able to break that restriction, the woman said in a confident manner. If Senior Duin can help a being attain the essence-effused body, then why didn't he just replicate that with another being rather than wait all this time? Hanli asked with furrowed brows. The other being was only able to attain the essence-effused body with Brother Duin's assistance through the use of essence-effused stones. These stones are extremely rare, and it's very difficult for beings to absorb them into their bodies. At the time, Brother Duin attempted to assist 6 of his brethren to attain the essence-effused body at once, but only one of them succeeded. After that, we couldn't gather any more essence-effused stones, so that course of action was no longer feasible. At the core of the matter, we simply want to ask you to help the other 2 break a restriction in the vast glacial realm. We're not asking you to take some kind of outrageous risk, the woman explained. After a brief pause, a wry smile appeared on Hanli's face. I probably have no choice but to agree, right? Hee. What do you think? At this moment, Duin Tianren had finished his flagon of wine, and he turned to Hanli with a cold expression on his face. If it really is as simple as you say, then I'm naturally willing to help. However, the vast glacial realm is fraught with peril, and that restriction was very likely left behind by an immortal, so there could be many unpredictable circumstances involved. Will you really be able to ensure my safety? Hanli asked after taking a deep breath. Nothing is set in stone in this world. Even if I were to guarantee your safety, would you believe me? The woman asked with a hint of a smile on her face. Hanli fell silent for a moment before continuing. Seeing as you're unable to make that promise, I'd like you to agree to 2 conditions of mine in return. As opposed to being annoyed, the woman was quite relieved to hear this. The fact that Hanli was willing to state conditions indicated that he was willing to undertake this task. Of course, even if you didn't state any conditions, Brother Duin and I will be sure to reward you handsomely for your efforts as long as you succeed. My first condition is very simple. As you know, I wish to access the super teleportation formation after returning from the vast glacial realm, but using the teleportation formation requires the expenditure of a vast number of top-grade spirit stones. I'm afraid I won't be able to issue such a massive sum on my own, Hanli said in a calm manner. Using the super teleportation formation does indeed require the expenditure of an astronomical number of top-grade spirit stones. How about this? I'll supply half of the spirit stones required. Are you happy with that? The woman promised without any hesitation. It seemed that providing this astonishing sum wasn't an issue for her at all. Hanli was rather taken aback by the fact that she was willing to offer so many spirit stones to help his cause, but he merely smiled as he continued. Thank you, Senior. My second condition is that after breaking the restriction, I want all of the other treasures aside from the few designated ones. No problem. We only want those few treasures, so you and the other 2 fellow Taoists can take everything else, the woman immediately replied, seemingly completely unsurprised by this condition. She didn't even discuss the matter with Duin Tianren, but he merely glanced at the woman and didn't state any objections. I'm not a greedy person. Seeing as you've accepted both of my conditions, I have no further objections. I'm willing to lend you my assistance after entering the vast glacial realm. Hanli rose to his feet as he cupped his fist in a salute. Great. With your help, I'm sure we'll enjoy resounding success. Brother Duin and I will visit you to disclose the specific details closer to the opening of the vast glacial realm. Also, I hope that you won't reveal what we discussed here to anyone else, the woman cautioned with a smile. Rest assured, Senior. I'll be sure to keep this a secret. If that's all, then I'll be taking my leave, Han Li replied with a respectful bow. All right, you can go now. If you encounter any difficulties during this time, you can refer to myself and Brother Duan as your backers. That should take care of most troubles that come your way. Oh right, you still don't know my full name, right? I'm Kai Liting, the woman said with a smile. When Han Li re-emerged from the rich aroma pavilion, there were already many people making their way into the main hall of the auction house, indicating that the auction was about to commence. Han Li immediately also followed suit without any hesitation. The entrance to the main hall was about 3 to 4 times the size of the entrances leading to the side halls, and the number of blue-robed guards outside also far outstripped that of the guards stationed in front of the side halls. However, these guards did nothing aside from maintaining basic order. Han Li followed the crowd into the auction house in an inconspicuous manner, and after walking through the entrance, he found himself in a hall with several corridors leading elsewhere. Each of the corridors had a sign hanging next to their entrances, upon which were written simple words like appraisal, pawn, and hall. There was a young man standing next to each of the signs in a respectful manner, and they seemed to be employees of the auction house. Han Li cast his gaze toward the signs, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. After a brief pause, he made his way toward one of them and asked, "What can I expect to find in here?" The young man standing next to the appraisal sign bowed and replied, "This is the place where auction items are taken to be appraised. If you have any precious items, they can be added to the list of auction items if the appraisers deem them to be worthy." "Oh, I see." Han Li nodded before making his way into the corridor. Kai Liting had promised to issue half of the expenses required for him to use the super teleportation formation, but the remaining half was still an astronomical sum that he had to take care of himself. As such, Han Li wanted to sell off some items to the auction house as he'd originally planned. The corridor wasn't a very long one. After walking for several tens of feet and rounding a corner, Han Li found himself standing before a dark red door. The door was wide open, but an azure light barrier concealed the entrance, and there were 7 or 8 foreign beings standing in a line in front of the light barrier. Han Li was rather surprised to see this, but he made his way over to the line calmly before standing at the rear. Azure light flashed, and the light barrier opened up of its own accord as a red-haired foreign being emerged from within. Judging from the wide smile on his face, he seemed to have received some good news. The foreign being paid no heed to everyone else lined up outside as he passed through the crowd and made his way out of the corridor in high spirits. Thus, the next person in the line proceeded to stride toward the light barrier. After only about 10 minutes, everyone in front of Han Li had gone in and re-emerged, indicating that the appraisers were quite quick and efficient. However, 4 or 5 more beings had since joined the line before Han Li. It appeared that many people had the same plan as Han Li, choosing to sell off their items to the auction house right before the commencement of the auction. After another foreign being emerged from the azure light barrier in a dejected manner, it was finally Han Li's turn, and he made his way into the room. After stepping through the light barrier, Han Li found himself in a massive room that was over 300 feet in size. The entire room had been constructed from some kind of grayish-white stone, and there were many runes carved all over the surfaces of this material, thereby ensuring secrecy within this appraisal room. There was also a jade table and 3 wooden chairs in the room, as well as a simple teleportation formation in the corner. There were 3 murky white humanoid figures sitting on the chairs, and due to the fact that their bodies had been entirely concealed under spiritual light, there was no way to glean their true appearances. Han Li reflexively swept his spiritual sense toward them, only to find that all 3 seemed to be carrying some kind of aura concealment treasure that completely thwarted his attempt to gauge their cultivation bases. "If you have something you'd like to offer to the auction house, you can show it to the 3 of us now. However, our 4 races auction will only be selling materials and treasures of an extremely high caliber, so if you don't have anything that's extremely rare or special, you can go to the side hall to sell your items there. On top of that, if you're dissatisfied with our appraisals, you can raise the issue to us, and we'll get another panel of 3 appraisers to offer their appraisals." The one who had spoken was the humanoid figure at the center of the trio, and she had a pleasant young female voice. "Thank you for the information. I'm sure I have something that will be of interest to you." Han Li nodded before rustling his sleeves, then flipping his hands over to produce a green jade vial and a pristine white jade box. Instead of approaching the 3 appraisers, Han Li tossed the items toward them from afar, and they were immediately caught by an invisible force before being slowly carried over to the trio. The two humanoid figures who hadn't spoken immediately grabbed a container each before opening them. As soon as the vial was opened, an extremely rich medicinal aroma wafted forth along with an indistinct dragon's roar. A ball of green light then flew out of the vial, and the item within the light seemed to possess abundant spiritual nature. The humanoid figure who was holding the vial let loose a faint cry of surprise as he hurried closed the vial again. At the same time, he swept a sleeve through the air, and a swath of white light shot forth to ensnare the ball of green light before drawing it into his grasp. He stared intently at the ball of light to find that there was an azure pill within it. The surface of the pill was smooth and supple, and an extremely lifelike silver dragon insignia could be seen on it. The humanoid figure picked up the pill before taking a light whiff, then began to carefully appraise it in silence. Meanwhile, the other humanoid figure also opened the white jade box in his hand, to find that there was a green section of bamboo that was around half a foot in length within it. The humanoid figure inspected the section of bamboo briefly before reaching out to touch it, upon which an arc of golden lightning that was as thick as a finger erupted from the surface of the bamboo amid a loud thunderclap. "This is golden lightning bamboo," the humanoid figure exclaimed. The woman in the middle was also quite surprised to hear this, but she repressed her shock as she cautioned, "Golden lightning bamboo. Please ensure that you've appraised it correctly, Brother Dao." "Rest assured, I'll be sure to appraise it carefully," the humanoid figure holding the jade box replied. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he crossed his arms as he waited in silence. Immediately thereafter, the humanoid figure reached a hand up into his sleeve before pulling out an inky black gourd. The ground was only several inches in size and extremely intricate in design. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D430, letter 1D556. Letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D5FA. The humanoid figure tipped the gourd over and aimed its opening at the green section of bamboo in the jade box before gently patting the underside of the gourd. Black light flashed from the opening of the gourd, and a fist-sized ball of black chi was expelled before striking the green bamboo. As soon as the two came into contact, a loud rumbling thunderclap erupted, and several arcs of golden lightning erupted once again to vanquish the black chi. After doing that, the humanoid figure still wasn't satisfied. He pulled out a green jar and released a burst of green chi from within, only for that to also be destroyed by the arcs of lightning unleashed by the section of bamboo. "There's no mistaking it. This is golden lightning bamboo, I'm sure of it," the humanoid figure confirmed. "Thank you for your efforts. How is the pill appraisal coming along, fellow Taoist? The pill possesses some spiritual nature already, so it must be quite an extraordinary item as well, right?" The woman nodded before turning to the other humanoid figure. "This pill predominantly contains wood attribute power with earth and metal attribute powers as secondary components. The pill has already attained very basic sentient will, and it's suitable for consumption for 7th and 8th tier upper race beings. However, if a 9th tier upper race being were to consume it, the effect of the pill would be less than a tenth of what it would be otherwise. This pill can qualify as a first-grade pill." After staring at the pill for a long while, the humanoid figure was somehow able to gauge the properties of the rising dragon pill down to a fault. Even Han Li couldn't help but be struck by a hint of surprise upon hearing this unerringly accurate appraisal. "Congratulations, fellow Taoist. This golden jade bamboo and these pills both qualify as auction items. In particular, the section of golden jade bamboo will be one of the most precious auction items that will be brought out near the end. By the way, is there a name for these pills? Also, I'll propose a starting price for both of these items, and you can tell me whether those starting prices are satisfactory to you," the woman said with a smile as she carefully appraised Han Li. Before Han Li had a chance to say anything, she picked up a white jade badge from the table before quickly scribbling something on it with her fingertip, then tossing it to Han Li. Han Li caught the jade badge and merely took a cursory glance at it before nodding as he replied, "I'm happy with these two starting prices. In any case, I'm confident that these two items wouldn't actually be sold for just their starting prices. As for those pills, they're called Rising Dragon pills, and they were very difficult to refine." "Rising Dragon pills, got it. We'll sell these pills under that name. Please keep that jade badge safe. That will act as your receipt for you to claim the spirit stones for those two items at the conclusion of the auction," the woman reminded. "I'll be sure to do so. If that's all, then I'll be heading into the auction now. Han Li cupped his fist in a calm salute as he prepared to take his leave. Enjoy the auction, fellow Taoist. We'll be sure to issue your spirit stones to you in secret at the end, the woman replied with a smile. Han Li nodded before turning to leave. It was unknown which of the trio was operating the restriction in the room, but none of the three appeared to have done anything before the azure light barrier parted to allow him passage. After emerging from the appraisal room, Han Li paid no heed to everyone outside as he made his way out of the corridor in an unhurried manner. There seemed to be even more foreign beings in the hall now, and a steady stream of people was filing into the corridor leading to the auction hall. Han Li didn't delay any further as he also followed suit. After passing through a passageway that was shimmering with yellow light, he found himself in a massive hall. After assessing his surroundings, Han Li was slightly stunned to find that not only was the hall extremely large and spacious, it had also been split into upper, middle, and lower levels. He couldn't tell what kind of material the middle and upper levels had been refined from, but they were entirely pristine white in color, and they managed to hover in midair despite the complete lack of support structures, creating quite a mysterious sight to behold. The middle and lower levels were filled with sets of normal tables and chairs that were each situated around 10 feet away from one another, yet the upper level consisted of a series of cabins of the same size. Furthermore, these cabins were occasionally shimmering with spiritual light, thereby indicating that some kind of restriction had been applied to them. It was quite clear that those cabins were reserved for beings of high status in Cloud City. Han Li only took a quick glance at the upper level before withdrawing a gaze and finding a random obscure corner to sit down at, where he silently awaited the commencement of the auction. Han Li sat on in his chair for around 2 hours as large numbers of foreign beings poured into the hall. The spacious 3-level hall was entirely filled in the end, and even the cabins on the upper level had all been occupied. Even the weakest foreign beings to attend the auction were at the nascent soul stage, while the most powerful beings were at the body integration. Just the body integration stage beings that Han Li counted amounted to around 4 or 5, and both Duan Tianren and Qian Jizzi among them. As for the other few body integration stage beings that Han Li saw, those were also presumably all important figures akin to elders in their respective races. At least 60 to 70 beings had already filed to the cabins on the upper level prior to Han Li's entrance, and all of them were at the body integration stage. However, Han Li didn't see Kai living among their ranks, which meant that she had either taken a cabin before Han Li had arrived, or she had no interest in participating in this auction at all. As he looked around at the packed auction hall, Han Li couldn't help but heave an internal sigh of awe and wonder. It was indeed true that Cloud City was inhabited by beings from all 13 heavenly cloud races, and even foreign beings outside of those races. But it was still quite extraordinary for so many body integration stage beings to appear in a single city. After all, there were only a dozen or so body integration stage beings among the human and demon races combined in Deep Heaven City, and that city had also been where the cream of the crop among the human and demon races resided. After waiting for a while longer, the entire hall was virtually packed to the rafters. A string of 3 crisp bell chimes rang out, and the gate leading to the main hall slowly swung shut amid bursts of flashing 5-colored light. When the gates were completely shut, the auction finally commenced. At the very front of the hall was a tall stage that was over 100 feet in height, similar to the kind of stage one would find in a normal auction house. The only thing that was different was that there was a golden humanoid puppet standing on each of the 4 corners of the stage. These puppets were all antiquated in design and several tens of feet tall, wielding a giant silver halberd each. Even though they were standing in a completely motionless manner, they gave off quite a fearsome aura, and it was quite apparent that they were extremely powerful. At the very center of the stage was a blue formation, within which was a faint red table. There were many runes carved all over the table, giving it an extremely mysterious appearance. As soon as the gates swung shut, the blue formation lit up and began emitting a low buzzing sound. As the runes on the spell formation flashed, a humanoid figure appeared behind the table. That spell formation was a teleportation formation. The humanoid figure was a little blurry when it first appeared, but it quickly became clearer and revealed itself to be a refined and graceful middle-aged man. The man wore a brocade robe and had a clean-shaven face. He appeared to be completely identical in appearance to a normal human being. However, as Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the man from afar, he He was stunned to discover that the middle-aged man was a mid-body integration stage being. On top of that, he could sense an extremely fearsome aura emanating from the man's body, and this observation told him that this man was an extremely dangerous being. The middle-aged man seemed to hold quite a resounding reputation in Cloud City, as indicated by the fact that the chatter in the auction hall immediately died down following his appearance. In fact, Hanley noticed that many of the beings around him were appraising the man on the stage with a hint of fear in their eyes. In contrast, the middle-aged man adopted a warm smile as he said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists, I am Xiao Bui. I'm sure that many of you know of me already, and there are even some among you who have met me in person. As such, I'll skip the self-introduction and cut straight to the chase. Due to the fact that the Sand Race, which I am a member of, is partly responsible for holding this 4 races auction, I was asked to act as the host. I won't elaborate too much on the rules of the auction. They're completely the same as that of normal auctions. Seeing as all of you are attending an auction of this level of prestige, I'm sure you all know basic auction rules and etiquette. Aside from that, I can disclose some information about the most precious auction items that are to be brought out near the conclusion of the auction. Those auction items are definitely not inferior to any that have been offered during the last 4 races auction. In fact, for some fellow Taoists, the final auction item will be far more valuable than even the great fortune pill that was sold for the highest price during the last 4 races auction. Alright, without further ado, let the auction begin. Xiao Bui's voice wasn't very loud, but he had injected his spiritual power into it, so it was clearly audible to everyone in the auction hall. Just a simple introduction had piqued the interest of the hundreds of thousands of beings present. In the instant that Xiao Bui's voice trailed off, a buzzing sound rang out from the blue formation again, and a dozen or so miniature light formations suddenly appeared on the empty table. Immediately thereafter, spiritual light flashed, and a dozen or so boxes of different sizes emerged along with a palm-sized jade badge. Everyone's attention was immediately drawn to the table as a result. Xiao Bui strode forward and picked up the jade badge before seeping his spiritual sense into it to glean the information within. He then picked up one of the jade boxes before removing the lid as he announced, "Similar to how the 4 races auctions have operated in the past, the items we'll be auctioning off first will still be different types of materials. We'll start off with this phoenix stone." Xiao Bui raised the box in his hand before him, and an object immediately hovered out from within. It was a strange rainbow stone that resembled the shape of a bird. Xiao Bui inspected the stone briefly before announcing, "Phoenix stones are rare materials that can only be found at the sites where true phoenixes are born. They are extremely prized and sought after both as a tool refinement materials, as well as a pill refinement ingredient. This phoenix stone weighs 1.7 kilograms, and it is of the highest quality with no impurities whatsoever. The starting price for this item will be 200,000 spirit stones." Phoenix stones were extremely versatile in their uses, and 2 million spirit stones was quite a modest starting price for such a large chunk. Even Han Li was rather tempted to place a bid for it. Even if he had no use for it in the immediate term, he could purchase it so that he'd always have it on hand for future usage if required. However, the events that unfolded next immediately made him give up on the item. As soon as Xiao Bui announced the starting price of 2 million spirit stones, bids came flying in thick and fast. Xiao Bui didn't even have to employ any auctioneer strategies to liven up the crowd, and the price was still quickly bid up to over 4 million spirit stones, which was double the starting price. In the end, the stone was purchased by a woman from the dark green race for the lofty price of over 5,200,000 spirit stones. She immediately issued the spirit stones on the spot in exchange for the item. Even though Han Li had attended many prestigious auctions in the past, he still couldn't help but draw a sharp breath upon seeing this. Phoenix stones were indeed precious materials, but this price as way too staggering. As such, Han Li naturally had no intention of joining in on the bidding. After that, Xiao Bui opened another jade box to reveal a shimmering golden spirit flower. Next up is a 6,000-year-old golden monarch flower. These flowers are the perfect medicinal catalyst for refining some precious pills, and the starting price is 3 million spirit stones. The flower was comparable in size to a human head, and each and every one of its petals looked as if it had been forged from pure gold. In stark contrast with the phoenix stone, the entire auction hall remained silent after the flower was revealed, and many people looked on with furrowed brows as an awkward atmosphere quickly began to permeate. This wasn't a surprising occurrence. After all, Most of the beings gathered here hadn't even ever heard of this so-called golden monarch flower, yet it had an even higher starting price than the phoenix stone. And Li began to stroke his chin with a contemplative look on his face upon seeing this. This was also the first time he had ever seen this flower, but from the faint smile on Xiao Bui's face, it appeared that he was quite confident in this auction item. 3 million, someone finally made a bid. Many people turned toward the bidder to find that he was a thin and frail elderly man from an indeterminate race, with a pair of white horns on his head. 3,200,000. Someone else immediately made another bid. 3,500,000. 3,800,000. One bid after another rolled in from various locations in the auction hall, and there were only a dozen or so participants in the bidding, but the price was climbing just as quickly as it had for the phoenix stone. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D696. It appeared that very few people knew how to use the flower, but the few beings that did held the flower in extremely high regard. After the white-horned elderly man gritted his teeth and made a staggering bid of 7 million spirit stones, all of the other bidders finally remained silent. Thus, Xiao Bui took out one auction item after another from the boxes on the table. All of the beings gathered here were high-grade cultivators, so he didn't have to present in-depth introductions for these items before they were sold after rounds of intense bidding. After all of the items in the jade boxes had been sold, blue light flashed from the teleportation formation again, and 7 or 8 jade vials appeared on the table. This time, several types of spirit liquid were being sold. These items were all extremely precious, and countless beings clambered to place their bids in rapid succession. The first few vials were all sold for prices that were 3 to 4 times their starting prices, and many beings in the auction hall were stunned by the ferocity of the bidding. This was the beauty of auctions like this. The same item could be worth nothing to someone, but be regarded as a priceless treasure by others. In the blink of an eye, all of the vials of spirit liquid had been sold aside from a final white vial. Xiao Bui's expression had remained quite calm throughout the auction, but a hint of desire finally flashed through his eyes as he cast his gaze toward the final small vial. He heaved a faint forlorn sigh before picking up the vial as he introduced in an extremely concise manner. This is half a vial of glazed heavenly flame liquid. The starting price will be 18 million spirit stones. What glazed heavenly flame liquid? Did I hear that right? How could this item possibly be sold in an auction? And the starting price is only 18 million. Is it real? How could that not be one of the final auction items? It's one of the 7 most precious spirit liquids of our spirit realm. The entire auction hall immediately burst into a frenzy as everyone stared at the small vial with incredulity and scorching yearning in their eyes. There were even a few cries of surprise that rang out from within the cabins on the upper level, and Han Li's expression also changed drastically as he heard the name of this spirit liquid being announced. Han Li had naturally heard of this glazed heavenly flame liquid, and it had been quite a sought-after treasure to him for a long time. This liquid was something that was refined from an extremely rare type of heavenly flame, and compared to other spirit items of the same caliber, it was even rarer and harder to find. After doing some research on the spirit liquid, Han Li had thought that it would be the most difficult to find among the list of materials that Qing Yuanzi had given him, but who would have thought that it would appear on this auction with such an incredibly low starting price? Glazed heavenly flame liquid was so rare and precious that it could easily be the auction item that was reserved for the finale. 18 million spirit stones was not a small sum, but compared to the value of this spirit liquid, it was cheap beyond belief. With that in mind, Han Li had a feeling that Xiao Bui was definitely going to be providing an explanation regarding why the starting price was so low. Han Li was not the only one in the auction hall waiting for an explanation. Many other people were also looking at Xiao Bui with astonishment intermingled with a hint of anticipation in their eyes, awaiting further elaboration on the situation. As expected, a faint smile appeared on Xiao Bui's face as he continued. I know that the starting price for this glazed heavenly flame liquid comes as quite a surprise to everyone, but there's naturally a reason for this. This spirit liquid was refined from a heavenly flame, but something went wrong during the refinement process, so it's technically a flawed item compared to true glazed heavenly flame liquid. However, I can guarantee that it possesses all of the main functions of normal glazed heavenly flame liquid. It's just that its efficacy will be severely hampered in comparison. A flawed item. The rowdy crowd immediately fell silent, and many people furrowed their brows with indecision. There had been precedents of flawed spirit medicines and even flawed treasures that had been sold during auctions, but it was said that all of these items were very lackluster and couldn't hold a candle to their perfect counterparts. After all, both pill and tool refinement required extremely strict regulation of the materials, as well as the refinement methods and processes used. Even the slightest mistake or discrepancy could result in a complete failure. Thus, the frenzied crowd suddenly calmed down, as if a massive bucket of cold water had been poured over everyone's heads. I thought that 18 million spirit stones was a ridiculously low starting price, but seeing as this is a flawed item, I now feel that it's far too high. A man in one of the cabins on the upper level chuckled coldly. Xiao Bui turned to a certain cabin on the upper level and replied, "There's no point in trying to barter with me, fellow Taoist Lai. The starting prices of the auction items were all set by the auction house. Come to think of it, wouldn't this glazed heavenly flame liquid be perfect for your flame spirit body? If it were a perfect item, then I would naturally try to purchase it at all costs, but if it's flawed, then it's next to useless to me, so why should I be interested in it?" The man who had spoken countered in a cold voice. Xiao Bui merely smiled in response, but didn't say anything in reply on this occasion. Instead, he waved a sleeve over the lid of the vial in his hand. An azure light flashed as the lid flew off of its own accord. A pillar of crimson flames immediately shot forth out of the vial's opening, following which a small ball of red liquid slowly emerged from within. The ball of liquid was translucent and shimmering with red light. Xiao Bui focused his gaze on it, and white light flashed in one of his hands as he summoned a flying sword that was around a foot in length. This was an antiquated sword that was flashing with a cold light, and it was quite apparent even from a single glance that this was a weapon of quite a high caliber. Xiao Bui flicked his wrist, and the flying sword instantly shot forth as a swath of cold light that hurtled directly toward the ball of red liquid. An astonishing scene then ensued. In the instant that the cold light came into contact with the ball of liquid, a loud sizzling sound rang out as a plume of white smoke wafted through the air. Immediately thereafter, the entire flying sword turned bright red and began to melt, completely disappearing after just a few flashes. That demonstration was sufficient to display the spirit liquid's fearsome might. Xiao Bui could sense everyone's hesitation, and he explained, "I hope everyone saw that clearly. Even though this spirit liquid is flawed, it still possesses the ability to melt metal and rocks, so it'll be very useful for tool refinement." After that, he opened his mouth to expel a ball of azure spiritual qi that immediately enshrouded the ball of red liquid within. The liquid began to burn in a frenzy like a phoenix rising from the ashes, transforming into a head-sized fireball amid a dull thump. A burst of scorching heat proliferated from the stage, quickly surging into the distance in all directions. All of a sudden, the air temperature in the entire hall was raised significantly, and the foreign beings sitting on the front few rows closest to the stage felt as if they'd been plunged into a sea of lava. All of the beings in the hall were high-grade cultivators, so they naturally wouldn't be injured by this level of heat, but many of them were still quite stunned by what they saw. Everyone could see that Xiao Bui had only expelled a ball of pure spiritual qi as a catalyst to draw forth that wave of scorching heat, so this was entirely a display of the spirit liquid's power alone. It came as quite a surprise to everyone that even a flawed ball of glazed heavenly flame liquid could possess such staggering power. Thus, quiet chattering rang out within the silent hall again, and the yearning in everyone's eyes was rekindled as they stared at the ball of fiery liquid. Xiao Bui knew that he had already achieved the intended effect at this point, so he casually swept a sleeve toward the fireball. A swath of light swept forth, and the scorching flames were snuffed out to reveal the ball of liquid again before it disappeared into the vial in a flash. Xiao Bui made a grabbing motion, and the vial was sealed shut again using its original lid. After that, the vial itself slowly descended onto the center of his palm. "Bidding for the glazed heavenly flame liquid will now commence," he announced without any further delay. 30 million. An astonishing bid was immediately made by someone from a certain corner of the auction hall. As opposed to matching the starting price, the bid was instantly upped the price by almost twofold. Many people who were just about to make lower bids were quite stunned by this opening salvo, and they all turned to find that the bidder was a pale-faced man in a set of long black robes. It was none other than Han Li. After a brief internal struggle, many of the beings present finally decided against making further birds. Glazed heavenly flame liquid was indeed extremely precious, but the inescapable fact of the matter was that it was still a flawed item, and it simply wasn't worth such a lofty price to them. Meanwhile, Han Li was merely sitting still on his chair. He wore a calm expression, but he was internally quite excited. Even though this spirit liquid was flawed, thereby significantly hampering its efficacy, it was still glazed heavenly flame liquid, so it would most likely still be useful to Qing Yuanzi. If he were to give up on this opportunity, he most likely won't be able to obtain perfectly refined glazed heavenly flame liquid anyway, so he was determined to get his hands on this spirit liquid, even if it were flawed. As such, he didn't hold back at all, and immediately bid the price up to a staggering height from the get-go. He wasn't hoping to be able to actually secure the spirit liquid at this price, but at the very least, he was going to scare off most of his potential competitors. If there were many people bidding for the same item, it was easy for them to get swept up in the heat of the moment, thereby bidding the price up to something that no one would be willing to pay had they retained their sense of logic. It was quite clear that Han Li's plan had proven to be effective, as the entire hall remained silent after that initial bid that he'd placed. This fellow Taoist has placed a bid of 30 million spirit stones. Are there any other bidders? If not, this vial of spirit liquid will go to this fellow Taoist after a count of 3, Xiao Bui announced as he glanced at the corner that Han Li was sitting in. Going once. Right at this moment an elderly voice sounded, 32 million. Han Li's brows furrowed as he turned toward that direction to find that the bidder was a yellow-robed elderly man sitting at the center of the auction. The man had a head of straw-like hair, but his eyebrows were quite bushy, and his blue eyes were bright and piercing. It's old man Fu. Why is he interested in this spirit liquid? Many people were quite surprised to see this new bidder, and they began to chat among themselves. It appeared that this old man was quite a renowned figure in Cloud City. 40 million. Before Han Li had a chance to formulate his next bid, another bid was placed by someone on the upper level. To Han Li's surprise, the bidder had a pleasant female voice, so it clearly wasn't the man with the Lai surname who had spoken earlier. As soon as that bid was made, a hesitant look appeared on old man Fu's face. He cast a glance up at the upper level and opened his mouth as if he were contemplating placing another bid, but shook his head and remained silent in the end. 40 million going once. 40 million going twice. A faint smile appeared on Xiao Bui's face as he quickly completed 2 counts. It was quite clear that this price was already higher than what was projected by the auction house, and he was also of the opinion that no one would dare to bid against a holy race being from the upper level. However, just as he was about to complete the 3rd and final count, Han Li placed another bid in an expressionless manner. 45 million. Everyone else in the auction hall, including even Xiao Bui himself, couldn't help but cast their eyes toward Han Li with peculiar expressions on their faces. It was not every day that they saw an upper race being who dared to bid against a holy race being. 47 million. The female holy race being on the upper level seemed to have been irked by Han Li's insolence, and her voice cooled significantly. Han Li's eyelids twitched slightly upon hearing this new price, but he still immediately followed up with a bid of 50 million without any hesitation. This was basically the extent of the number of spirit stones he currently possessed, so if the price were to be raised any higher, he'd have no choice but to give up. Thankfully, this price seemed to have also exceeded the limit of what the woman on the upper level was willing to pay, and she gave a cold harumph before falling silent. After completing a quick count of 3, Xiao Bui announced, "All right, this half vial of glazed heavenly flame liquid goes to this fellow Taoist for 50 million spirit stones. Please issue your payment right away." Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief before immediately rising to his feet and making his way onto the stage. Upon reaching Xiao Bui, Han Li brought out a bag of top-grade spirit stones that he'd prepared in advance from within his storage bracelet. Xiao Bui swept his spiritual sense toward the bag before nodding with a faint smile and handing the small white vial over to Han Li. Han Li removed the lid of the vial and took a quick glance inside, upon which a hint of elation appeared on his face. After extending a slight bow toward Xiao Bui, he walked down from the stage in an unhurried manner before returning to his original seat. During this process, Han Li naturally sensed many pairs of eyes fixated on him, and needless to say, most of them were not appraising him with benevolent expressions on their faces. and Li merely chuckled coldly in his heart upon seeing this. Even if there were beings here who had cultivated certain special secret techniques, all they'd be able to identify would be that he was in some kind of disguise. After all, even Duan Tianren, who was at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, hadn't even been able to glean his true appearance, and there was no way that the most powerful beings in this auction hall would bother to come after him for a half vial of flawed spirit liquid. As such, after returning to his seat, Han Li merely closed his eyes as if he weren't interested in the rest of the auction. Everything proceeded quite smoothly thereafter, and there were even two other items that were sold for a price that exceeded that of the glazed heavenly flame liquid, but they hadn't been reserved for the finale either. One of them was a treasure that had been passed down since ancient times, known as the myriad beast conch horn. Even though it wasn't a divine spirit treasures, its whistle could make all of the low-grade spirit beasts within a certain area obedient to the user, so it was quite an extraordinary treasure. The other auction item was the vial of rising dragon pills that Han Li had refined. After Xiao Bui had explained the astonishing effect of the pills, the entire auction hall had burst into an elated frenzy. These pills were greatly beneficial both for enhancing one's magic power and for breakthroughs, so it really was a case of the more the better. Furthermore, spatial tempering stage pills were extremely rare in auctions, so an intense round of bidding ensued as soon as they were unveiled. Even the beings below the spatial tempering stage in the auction hall were bidding up the price for all they were worth. They'd rather purchase the pills and use them in the future than miss out on this brilliant opportunity. As for the spatial tempering stage beings who were stuck at bottlenecks and desperately needed these pills, they were naturally unwilling to back down, either. Who knew if spatial tempering stage pills would feature again in the upcoming editions of the Four Races auction? As such, after a bout of frenzied bidding, the vial of rising dragon pills was sold for an astronomical price of 63 million, even higher than the price that Han Li had purchased the glazed heavenly flame liquid for. Much to his surprise, the pills were purchased by the holy race woman who had been competing with Han Li for the glazed heavenly flame liquid earlier. This woman naturally no longer needed this pill, so she was most likely purchasing them for one of her juniors. This was quite a disheartening outcome for all of the people on the lower and middle levels. And Li also heaved a forlorn internal sigh upon hearing this final price. This wasn't because he was displeased with the price that the pills had been sold for. Instead, he was thinking back to all of the rising dragon pills he'd consumed in the past 2 years and calculating how many spirit stones they would have fetched him had he sold them instead. Unsurprisingly, it was an extremely staggering sum. Furthermore, he was most likely going to have to continue consuming rising dragon pills for the next few centuries. It was a massive waste. But then again, if it weren't for the fact that he had all these pills that he could consume to assist him in his cultivation, there was no way that he'd be able to progress to the spatial tempering stage from the early deity transformation stage in just a few centuries with his ordinary aptitude. This was why the mysterious small vial was even more valuable than the profound heavenly treasure in his heart. With the profound heavenly treasure, he could reign supreme over the entire spirit realm in the future, but without the mysterious small vial, he had no confidence in his ability to even make it to that point. Just as these thoughts were running through Han Li's mind, the auction finally reached its climax. After a blue puppet was taken away from the stage by its buyer, Xiao Bui looked around as a serious expression appeared on his face. I presume many of you are already growing quite impatient, so without further ado, I'll now be presenting the final few auction items for today. 2 of these items are precious treasures supplied by our 4 races, while the other 2 were supplied by other fellow Taoists. Just as Xiao Bui was making this announcement, a burst of light erupted from the teleportation formation on the stage, following which 4 humanoid figures emerged. The 4 consisted of a short elderly man with a long beard, a tall and broad-armored being wearing a golden mask, a woman with a gorgeous figure, yet a hideous face that was riddled with green scales, and a strange black being with 2 identical heads. In the face of the widespread scrutiny they were receiving, the 4 beings all remained quite calm, as if they were completely unfazed. However, all of the beings in the auction hall drew a sharp breath in unison upon seeing this, and a burst of chatter rang out again. It's those 4 seniors. Indeed, those are the 4 great guest members of our Cloud City. To think that they've been invited to this auction as well. At the same time as the 4 beings appeared on the stage, Han Li also opened his eyes, and his heart stirred as he discovered that they were all mid-body integration stage beings. It was no wonder that their emergence was creating such a massive stir. Xiao Bui turned to the four beings with a smile on his face, and cupped his fist to extend a salute as he greeted. "Thank you for coming, fellow Taoists. You're welcomed. We were paid to be here, so we certainly weren't going to not show up," the bearded elderly man chuckled in response. In contrast, the other three were rather cold and aloof toward Xiao Bui, and they merely extended customary salutes in return, but remained silent. Xiao Bui was clearly already accustomed to this, and he merely nodded before turning around as he continued. "There are only 4 items that have been reserved for the finale, but they include all types of items like spirit beasts, materials, and spirit treasures, so you surely won't be disappointed." After that, Xiao Bui turned to the elderly man and said, "Brother Lan, please reveal your auction item first." The man nodded before rustling his sleeve, and a strange cry rang out, following which an object flew out from within. It was a palm-sized black leather pouch that was completely mundane and nondescript in appearance. However, the old man was treating the pouch with great care as he began to chant something while carefully pointing his finger a few times at the leather pouch. Letter 1d627, letter 1d633, letter 1d626, letter 212F, letter 1d4cc, letter 1d626, letter 1d4b8, letter 1d630, letter 1d4c2. Black light swirled around the surface of the pouch, following which bursts of black mist suddenly erupted from within. Immediately thereafter, the mist began to swell, then converged to form a black cage that was around 10 feet tall in the blink of an eye. Within the cage was a small purple beast that was huddled up into a ball, and its entire body was bound tightly by a series of thin golden and silver chains. Due to the fact that its head and limbs were all burrowed into its body, it appeared to be like a large furball from afar, making it impossible to glean its true form. At this moment, everyone below the stage, including Han Li, was staring intently at the small purple beast. It had been reserved for the finale, so they knew that this was definitely no ordinary spirit beast. After all, there was a 4th-tier upper-race sentient puppet that had been sold earlier, and even that hadn't been reserved for the finale. Could it be that this spirit beast possessed holy-grade power? The same thought flashed through everyone's minds, and hints of scorching yearning appeared in their eyes. However, the faint black light emanating from the cage managed to keep out all of their prying spiritual sense, thereby thwarting their attempts to glean the small beast's true appearance. Looks like all of you are growing rather impatient. Brother Lan, I'll let you introduce this beast to everyone," Xiao Bui chuckled. "Sure thing. There are not too many people who are aware of this beast's origins, but I'm sure many of you know about the 8 mystical beasts of our spirit realm, which are only ranked below the almighty true spirits," the old man said with a stroke of his beard. "What, the 8 mystical beasts? Could this be one of them?" The entire auction hall instantly erupted into a frenzy, and there were even many astonishing auras that erupted uncontrollably from within the stone cabins on the upper level. "That's not the case, fellow Taoists. The 8 mystical beasts are all extremely powerful creatures, and even though they aren't comparable to true spirit beings, they're definitely not creatures that can be captured by holy race beings. The spirit beast in the cage is actually a mixed-blood descendant of one of the 8 mystical beasts, the human-faced worm. Even though it's only a mixed-blood creature, it possesses an extremely large amount of the human-faced worm's bloodline, and if carefully nurtured, it's not impossible for it to become just as powerful as a true human-faced worm in the future. According to the results of our examination, this beast should be less than 100 years old, but the spiritual chi fluctuations emanating from its body are already comparable to upper race beings of the lower tiers. Most importantly, this beast has already displayed several powerful endowed abilities of the human-faced worm. Even for holy race beings like me, it would have been impossible to capture it alive had it not been for the fact that several of us joined forces to do so. By the way, this beast was captured by none other than the 4 of us." The elderly man chuckled as he made a grabbing motion toward the black cage. The golden and silver chains around the small beast's body split apart of their own accord amid a dull thump, and all of them flew into the elderly man's hand as a thin streak of golden and silver light. The entire hall immediately fell completely silent. Everyone wanted to see the true appearance of a spirit beast that had inherited most of a human-faced worm's bloodline. As soon as the chains were removed, the small beast shuddered, but it still didn't immediately rise to its feet, choosing instead to continuing lying motionlessly in the corner. Many people began to exchange glances with one another upon seeing this. However, in the next instant, a ball of scintillating purple light suddenly erupted from the small beast's body. All of the people staring at the cage closed their eyes involuntarily, yet Hanley managed to keep his eyes open as a burst of blue light flashed through his pupils. Arg! Impossible! Where did the spirit beast go? After everyone finally reopened their eyes, many of them were shocked to find that the small beast had disappeared without a trace from within the black cage. However, the expressions of the beings on the stage remained unchanged, and the elderly man harumphed coldly. "You still dare to play these little tricks even now. Looks like we didn't discipline you enough on the way here." The elderly man raised a hand as he spoke before flicking a finger toward the black cage from afar. A pea-sized ball of light shot forth from his fingertip before disappearing into the cage in a flash. In the next instant, azure light erupted from a corner of the cage, following which the small purple beast reappeared. At the same time, it bent its four limbs slightly to absorb the impact before landing on the ground in a soundless manner like a ball of cotton. Thus, the small beast was finally revealed to everyone as a purple beast that resembled a fox. The beast's body was only around half an inch in size, and its eyes were darting around incessantly. Those eyes were no different from that of highly intelligent beings, thereby indicating that it had already attained a good level of intelligence. The only thing that set this beast apart from a normal spirit fox would be the faint silver scales that could be seen on its nose and ears. However, these patches of scales were only the size of fingernails, and it was really difficult to see them unless one was paying particularly close attention. Is this really a spirit beast that's inherited the bloodline of the human-faced worm? It looks no different from a normal fox beast, someone exclaimed in a disappointed manner. Many of the other beings present were also appraising the small beast with furrowed brows, unable to identify how it was supposed to be special in any way. A normal fox beast? I'd advise all of you to take a closer look, fellow Taoists. A sinister look suddenly appeared on the elderly man's benevolent face, and he abruptly thrust a palm toward the black cage from afar. A resounding boom erupted from within the cage, following which white lightning flashed, and a layer of white electricity appeared. A string of loud thunderclaps then rang out as countless thin arcs of lightning transformed into sharp blades that hurtled directly toward the small beast in the cage. An extremely humanized expression of alarm and fury appeared on the small beast's face upon seeing this, and it let loose a low snarl as purple light swirled over its body. All of a sudden, a projection surfaced above it, shielding its body within. This was the projection of a faint silver worm. The worm projection was extremely blurry and indistinct, making the onlooker only barely able to identify it as a worm, but all of the blades of lightning disappeared like sandcastles in the tide after striking the projection. After absorbing so much lightning, the worm projection had swelled to several times its original size, almost filling up the entire cage as it raised its head to let loose an enraged roar. All of a sudden, the cage began to screech and groan as if it were struggling to hold itself together. All of the beings present drew a sharp breath in unison upon seeing this. Just a projection conjured up by this purple beast in its infantile stage was this powerful. It was indeed displaying astonishing potential. At the sight of the astonishment etched on everyone's faces, the elderly man knew that he had achieved the intended effect, and he chuckled as he raised a hand up into the air. Brilliant golden and silver light erupted, and the thin chains appeared again before hurtling toward the cage to bind the small beast. The chains were somehow able to completely disregard the worm projection and wound themselves tightly around the purple fox's body, rendering all of its struggles completely futile. Immediately thereafter, the silver worm projection that it had conjured up vanished, and the black cage settled again. Xiao Bui knew the importance of striking while the metal was hot, so before everyone could recover from their shock, he immediately announced, "I'm sure all of you have witnessed this beast's powers and no longer have any doubts about its capabilities. This starting price for this mystical beast will be 80 million spirit stones. Let the bidding begin." 85 million. 90 million. As expected, after witnessing the beast's powers, a series of astonishing bids were made, and within mere moments, the price had been bid up to over 100 million spirit stones. However, Hanley merely sat on the spot and didn't participate in the bidding. This beast did indeed possess brilliant potential, but it would definitely take a long time to nurture. He already had his weeping soul beast, leopard Kirin beast, and his gold devouring beetles, so another spirit beast would most likely be superfluous to his requirements. On top of that, even if he were tempted to bid for the beast, he simply didn't have enough spirit stones to participate in the bidding anyway. At this point, even the holy race beings on the upper level were beginning to participate in the bidding. As such, even if he hadn't purchased the glazed heavenly flame liquid earlier, the chances of him securing the beast now were extremely slim. However, at this moment, a peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face as he appraised the silver fox in the cage. Perhaps it was simply a figment of his imagination, but the appearance and demeanor of the bound purple beast somehow struck him with a sense of familiarity. In his eyes, the small beast bore a strong resemblance to Silvermoon. Even though Silvermoon's true form was a silver wolf, she had also possessed a spirit fox in the human world, so it wasn't particularly strange that there was a certain level of resemblance between the two. Even though he was well aware of this, he still couldn't help but feel slightly saddened at the sight of the pitiable purple fox that was bound in the cage. Back when Silvermoon had left him, he certainly hadn't failed to notice the emotions hidden deep within her eyes prior to her departure. However, at his pitiful cultivation base at the time, he couldn't do anything aside from look on as she returned to the spirit realm. Perhaps it was due to the fact that Han Li's expression was different from those of the other foreign beings in the auction, but the immobilized purple fox seemed to have taken notice of him and suddenly turned its gaze toward him. As soon as their eyes met, it blinked its intelligent eyes, and a hint of confusion intermingled with elation suddenly appeared on its face. The changes in the purple fox's expression were extremely minute, but they certainly couldn't escape the notice of Han Li's spirit eye ability. As such, he immediately faltered slightly, and a hint of befuddlement welled up in his heart. 130 million. An astonishing bid was made by the owner of an elderly voice on the upper level, and the entire auction hall finally fell completely silent. It seemed that no one was able to outdo that astronomical bid. 130 million going once. 130 million going twice. Going thrice. Xiao Bui was clearly also of the opinion that no one else would be able to place a higher bid, so after completing a quick count of 3, he turned to the upper level with a smile and said, "Congratulations, Brother Lu. With this mystical beast by your side, I'm sure you'll become even more formidable." It seemed that he recognized the final bidder. I didn't think that you'd still recognize my voice after we've been apart for so many years, fellow Taoist Xiao," the final bidder chuckled in response. Immediately thereafter, a burst of light suddenly flashed from a stone cabin near the back of the upper level, following which a ball of yellow light flew forth from within before landing on the stage in the flash. Han Li's eyes narrowed as he looked on from his seat, and he discovered that this was an elderly man with yellow skin wearing a set of brocade robes. The man had a head of curly hair, and had quite a burly and intimidating stature that was almost 2 feet taller than Xiao Bui. A hint of wariness flashed through Xiao Bui's eyes at the sight of the elderly man, but he still said in a respectful manner, "I suggest that it would be best for you to knock this beast unconscious before you take it. Otherwise, it could be a little troublesome to control." "Are you afraid that I won't be able to control a mere infantile beast? Don't worry, just tally up the spirit stones, and I'll be taking this spirit beast as is. You can get rid of the cage now, fellow Taoist Lan." The brocade-robed man seemed to be very confident in his own abilities, and he casually tossed a bag of spirit stones at Xiao Bui before turning to the bearded elderly man. If you say so, Brother Lu, I'll be removing the restriction now." The elderly man nodded before slowly raising a hand as he prepared to make a grabbing motion toward the cage. The small purple beast in the cage seemed to be aware that something bad was about to happen upon seeing this, and all of its fur stood up on end as it let loose a sharp screech. As soon as this piercing screech rang out, the beings of lower cultivation bases present were struck by a ringing sensation in their heads, following which the magic power within their bodies became stagnant and disobedient. These beings were naturally stunned by this turn of events. However, for a spatial tempering stage being like Han Li, the effects of this screech were naturally quite negligible. As for the elderly man, his expression didn't even change in the slightest as azure light flashed from his fingertips. Meanwhile, the brocade-robed man had made quite a confident and bold declaration earlier, but he didn't actually dare to get too complacent. His eyes were fixed intently on the small beast as he readied himself to restrict it as soon as the elderly man withdrew the cage. All of the other beings in the auction house also had their eyes fixed firmly on the stage. At the sight of the purple fox's alarmed expression, a thought suddenly seemed to have occurred to Han Li, and his eyelids abruptly twitched as a dull crack rang out. His hand was resting on the armrest of his chair, but he had abruptly clenched his fingers and crushed the jade armrest into dust. Right at this moment, a startling turn of events abruptly unfolded. An earth-shattering boom erupted from outside the auction hall, following which the massive gates that were flashing with spiritual light suddenly exploded into countless shattered fragments. The entire auction hall fell deathly silent, as expressions of astonishment appeared on everyone's faces. This was the Four Races auction. Who would dare to do something so brazen and reckless here? However, the entire auction hall then immediately erupted into a frenzy, as countless voices rang out at once. "Arg, what happened? What's going on? Guards, guards!" Due to the fact that the restriction on the gates had been broken, there were spiritual lights flashing erratically at the entrance, making it impossible for everyone to see who the intruder was. Xiao Bui was also quite stunned by this sudden development, but as a body integration stage being, he was able to quickly recompose himself as he yelled, "There's no need to panic. With our four races hosting this auction, no one can wreak havoc here without consequences." His voice was like a loud thunderclap that instantly instilled a sense of clarity into everyone's minds. He was right. Setting aside all of the guards that had been deployed to the auction house, with so many upper race and holy race beings here, no one could possibly expect to barge in and not suffer the consequences of their actions. "The four races, eh? You sure do dare to talk. Do you really think I wouldn't dare to kill all of you here?" A thunderous male voice sounded from outside the shattered gates. Xiao Bui's heart sank upon hearing this bold declaration, but his expression remained calm as he asked, "Who are you, and how dare you wreak havoc in our Cloud City? Is your Cloud City some kind of lethal realm? Why wouldn't I dare to wreak havoc here?" The sound of footsteps rang out from outside the auction hall, following which a humanoid figure slowly strode in. Everyone was finally able to glean the appearance of the intruder, and they discovered that this was a silver-robed middle-aged man. He had a set of rather delicate facial features, but his expression was as cold as ice. Many of the beings in the auction hall immediately tried to sweep their spiritual sense toward him, only for their spiritual sense to be repelled by a burst of mysterious power emanating from the man's body, thereby completely thwarting their attempts to ascertain his cultivation base. However, a being who dared to barge into the Four Races auction in such a reckless manner, naturally, had to be an immensely powerful one. What everyone failed to notice was that as soon as the purple beast caught sight of the man, an ecstatic expression appeared on its face. However, its body was still bound by the golden and silver chains, so it was unable to do anything. "Who are you and how did you get in here? What happened to all of the guards outside?" Xiao Bui asked with a solemn expression. "I brought him in here, and I told the guards outside to grant us passage. Do you have a problem with that?" Another unfamiliar voice suddenly rang out, following which another person strode into the auction hall. This was a white-robed young man who appeared to only be around 27 to 28 years old. His appearance was extremely ordinary, and there were no memorable features about him whatsoever. However, as soon as the young man entered the auction hall, an alarmed expression appeared on Xiao Bui's face as he hurriedly extended a respectful bow. Xiao Bui pays his respects to Senior Fei. "We pay our respects to Senior Fei." The other holy race beings on the stage also seemed to have recognized the young man, and their expressions also changed drastically as they hurriedly extended respectful bows. Not only that, but all of the holy race beings on the upper level also flew out of their cabins before paying their respects to the young man. Han Li looked up to find that even Qian Jizzi and Duan Tianren were among these holy race beings. Both of them were at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, yet they were also appraising the young man with awe and veneration in their eyes. As such, it was not difficult to deduce that this young man had to be a grand ascension stage being. With that in mind, Han Li's expression was also filled with astonishment as he cast his gaze toward the young man. At this point, all of the other foreign beings in the auction hall had naturally also guessed this young man's true identity, and many of them gulped nervously with shock and alarm etched on their faces. The entire hall fell completely silent once again. "Why have you come here, Senior Fei? Didn't you go into seclusion?" The one who had spoken was Xiao Bui. Instead, it was another being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage that Han Li didn't recognize. This was a strange being with dark green stripes all over his face, wearing a set of beast-thighed robes. "Oh, so you're here as well, Junior High. I came out of seclusion and arrived in Cloud City due to the recent Jiao Kai race invasion, but I'm here today because of fellow Taoist too," the young man sighed. "May I ask who the senior two is?" the green-faced being asked with an uneasy look in his eyes. The young man merely smiled upon hearing this but didn't offer a reply. Instead, he turned to the silver-robed man and asked, "Brother two, have you found the one you're looking for?" "Of course." The silver-robed man looked around before his gaze finally settled on the stone stage. A hint of elation flashed through his eyes at the sight of the purple beast, but his face quickly fell at the sight of the black cage and thin chains that the small beast had been bound by. His body swayed, and he disappeared amid a flash of silver light. In the next instant, silver light flashed on the stage, and the silver-robed being reappeared in a soundless manner. The brocade-robed man was given quite a fright by the sudden appearance of the silver-robed man right next to him, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "Senior, you piss off." The silver-robed man had no intention of speaking with him, and he cut him off in an abrupt manner before casually sweeping a sleeve toward him. An immense burst of power was immediately sent hurtling toward the brocade-robed man, and he was naturally quite alarmed and enraged by this sudden, unprovoked attack. He reflexively drew a sharp breath, and a layer of yellow light surfaced all over his body as he prepared to withstand the attack. Following an earth-shattering boom, the yellow light around his body tremored violently, and he was forced back 7 or 8 steps in quick succession, almost falling off the stage in the end. Xiao Bui's expression changed drastically upon seeing this. He was well aware of just how powerful this brocade-robed man was. He specialized in an earth attribute cultivation art of an extremely high caliber, and defense had always been his forte. However, he wasn't even able to withstand a casual strike from the silver-robed man, and that was absolutely astonishing. It appeared that this silver-robed man was most definitely a grand ascension stage being as well. The other 4 beings on the stage had also clearly come to the same conclusion as Xiao Bui, and all of them hurriedly took a few steps backward at the sight of the approaching silver-robed man. However, an unexpected turn of events then unfolded. The silver-robed man completely ignored them as he strode directly toward the cage, then tore it apart with his bare hands with ease as if it were nothing more than a papier-mâché structure. Thus, the ruined cage and the small beast plummeted downward at the same time, and the 2 halves of the cage disappeared into clouds of black chi before they had even fallen onto the ground below. Meanwhile, the small beast let loose an elated peal of laughter as it was caught by the silver-robed man, who then swept his other hand over the golden and silver chains around its body. Following a string of dull thumps, the chains were all shattered, and as soon as the small purple beast was freed, it dove into the silver-robed man's arms and rubbed its head against him in an extremely affectionate manner. "HMPH, that's what you get for not staying in the cave abode and running off on your own. Tell me who captured you and brought you here." The man stroked the small beast's head in a doting manner before a frosty expression suddenly appeared on his face. The 4 mid-body integration stage beings nearby were quite alarmed to hear this, and they all exchanged fearful glances with one another. This small beast had been captured by the 4 of them and transported to the auction hall. Otherwise, as guest members of the heavenly cloud races, they most likely wouldn't have been invited onto the stage. At this moment, the small purple beast turned to the bearded elderly man with a resentful expression, then let loose a string of low snarls as if it really were communicating something to the silver-robed man. "What? He tortured you? How dare you? The 4 of you can all pay with your lives." An enraged expression appeared on the silver-robed man's face, and an astonishing baleful aura erupted from his body. His shoulders swayed, and his arm shot forth toward the elderly man like lightning. There was a distance of over 100 feet between them, but his arm somehow elongated drastically, and his 5 fingers shimmered with silver light as they reached the elderly man in a flash. The attack was so fast that it reached its target almost instantaneously. At the same time, an asphyxiating burst of spiritual pressure crashed down upon the elderly man. He was already prepared for an attack, but never did he think that the attack would come with such immense power and ferocity. In the face of this lightning-fast attack, he only had a chance to open his mouth to expel an azure bead that hurtled directly toward the oncoming hand. At the same time, he activated an incantation seal that he'd already prepared in advance, and his body suddenly blurred as 3 light barriers of different colors instantly materialized before him. However, the events that unfolded next plunged the elderly man into a state of extreme horror. Before the azure bead even had a chance to unleash its power, it was shattered into countless fragments by a flash of silver light. Almost at the exact same moment, the silver-robed man's hand pierced through all three light barriers in an instant, and 5 streaks of silver light flashed directly toward the elderly man's head. The man naturally had countless other abilities that he had yet to unleash, but in this dire situation, there was nothing that he could do. As such, his face immediately turned deathly pale as a sense of impending doom dawned upon him. However, right at this moment, a calm voice sounded nearby. "Please stop, fellow Taoist 2. Have you forgotten what you promised me?" All of a sudden, an ordinary-looking palm appeared out of thin air, swatting the 5 streaks of silver light aside with a casual wave. Immediately thereafter, spatial fluctuations erupted nearby, and the young man with the Fey surname appeared beside the silver-robed man with a serious expression on his face. The silver-robed man seemed to be rather wary of the young man, as indicated by the fact that he didn't unleash any further attacks after his first attack was nullified. However, he still wore a dark expression on his face as he said, "HMPH, I did indeed promise that I wasn't going to kill anyone here, but I never said I'd spare them from all punishment. Of course, seeing as these fellow Taoists have hurt your daughter, they naturally must be punished," the young man said with a smile. "Daughter, that means you're a human-faced worm." The elderly man was yet to recover from that near-death experience, and his face paled even further upon hearing the young man's words. "Indeed, my true form is that of a human-faced worm. Do you want to capture me as well?" The silver-robed man turned to the old man with a cold look in his eyes. "I wouldn't dare to even dream of it, Senior. We didn't know that this spirit beast was your daughter, so I implore you to spare us, Senior." The elderly man was a holy race being, but he knew the importance of cowering when required. As such, he immediately begged for his life in this grim situation. "You were far too reckless, Brother Lan. How could you have gone hunting for spirit beasts near Brother Two's cave abode? You should thank the heavens that no harm has befallen Brother Two's daughter," the young man scolded with a dark expression. "I didn't know that Senior Two's cave abode was under the region of the sea. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't have dared to venture anywhere near it." Cold sweat began to pour down the elderly man's face upon hearing this, and the other 3 beings' faces had also paled significantly. Even though they were already holy race beings, they knew that the difference between the grand ascension stage and the body integration stage was like that of heaven and earth. After reaching the grand ascension stage, one would attain unfathomable power, thereby creating an insurmountable gulf between themselves and body integration stage beings. Under normal circumstances, a few beings at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage could perhaps put a fight against an early body integration stage being. But a few beings at the pinnacle of the body integration stage would only be able to flee for their lives in the face of an early grand ascension stage being. After reaching the grand ascension stage, one was essentially half a true immortal, and through their cultivation, they could grasp some extremely powerful laws of heaven and earth, making them virtually completely invincible to body integration stage beings. As for the final tribulation transcendence stage, that was actually only an arbitrary division. Aside from a slight change in the nature of one's magic power, beings who reached that stage wouldn't actually be a whole lot more powerful than grand ascension stage beings. Furthermore, after reaching the tribulation transcendence stage, there were no longer any early, mid, or late classifications. Most of them would also go into indefinite seclusion to try and transcend their true immortal tribulations in an attempt to ascend to that higher realm. As such, grand ascension stage beings were the most powerful beings in the spirit realm aside from those true spirit beings. The 4 guest members of the heavenly cloud races had just captured the daughter of such an unfathomably powerful being, so they were naturally completely petrified. However, they were situated in Cloud City, and there were so many powerful beings from all 13 races around them. As such, if the human-faced worm had come here alone, then they wouldn't have been all that fearful toward him. The most worrying thing to them was that the young man with the Fey surname seemed to be an acquaintance of the human-faced worm, and he had even led the human-faced worm to this place. Hence, it would naturally be impossible for them to try and encourage everyone to attack the human-faced rim together, which was why they were so horrified by this current situation. If it weren't for the fact that the young man had dispelled the lethal attack that was about to take the elderly man's life, they would have already fled for their lives. "All right, I'll do you a favor and spare their lives, Brother Fei, but they tortured my daughter on the way, so I have to punish them." The silver-robed man suddenly chuckled coldly after a brief silence. He then swung his hand toward the elderly man in a lightning-fast chopping motion, and before the old man could react, one of his arms had already been dismembered amid a flash of silver light, and a geyser of blood erupted from the wound. The elderly man was greatly startled by this, yet before he had a chance to administer treatment to himself, the young man suddenly appeared by his side before gently thrusting a palm toward his wound. Brilliant green light flashed, and the bleeding was immediately stopped, following which the wound began to heal at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye. Elderly man's face turned deathly pale, and he was just about to say something when the young man waved a hand toward him and said, "Seeing as Brother Two has already punished you, the others will be spared of further punishment. However, this is not the end of the matter. I don't care how you captured Brother Two's daughter, but all of you must give him 100 million spirit stones each as compensation for mental damages. If you're unwilling to do so, then you can all leave one of your arms here." The four beings all heaved internal sighs of relief upon hearing this. If they could settle such a major issue through spending just 100 million spirit stones each, then that would naturally be close to the ideal outcome. Otherwise, even if they were to be spared now, they'd have to essentially hide in Cloud City for the rest of their lives, as venturing out of the city could result in them being hunted down by this grand ascension stage being. The elderly man had lost an arm and some blood essence, but at his cultivation base, reattaching a limb was a simple matter. Thus, the four beings immediately gathered together and brought out 4 bags of spirit stones, all of which they handed to the young man in a respectful manner. The young man took the bags of spirit stones from them before turning to the silver-robed man with a smile as he said, "I'm sure these spirit stones won't be enough to assuage your rage, but this is the first time fellow Taoist Lan and the others had visited your crepe Myrtle Sea, so they were completely oblivious and certainly didn't intend to offend you. As such, please do me a favor and let bygones be bygones." The silver-robed man's expression remained quite furious upon hearing this, but after glancing at the elderly man's dismembered arm, then turning back to the young man's smiling face, he finally gave a reluctant nod in the end. "All right, I'll do you a favor and spare them on this occasion, but from now on, they are prohibited from coming to my crepe Myrtle Sea. If I find them there again, don't blame me for putting an end to their lives." A set of blurry silver patterns appeared on the silver-robed man's face as he spoke, giving him a far more sinister appearance. The young man wasn't surprised at all by the silver-robed man's condition, and he tossed the bags of spirit stones over to him as he replied with a smile, "Of course. If fellow Taoist Lan and the others dare to venture into your crepe Myrtle Sea again, then they'll be rid of their statuses as guest members of our heavenly cloud races, and you'll be able to do with them as you pleased." The four beings in question began to sweat profusely again after hearing this. The silver-robed man caught the 4 bags of spirit stones, and his expression eased slightly as spiritual light flashed from his hands, following which the 4 bags abruptly disappeared. Immediately thereafter, the man suddenly patted the small beast on the back, and purple light flashed as the small beast disappeared, only to be replaced by a little girl who appeared to be 6 or 7 years old. The little girl had snowy white skin and a pair of bright black eyes. There were several purple little braids woven into her hair, and she was extremely adorable. Many people's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. This small beast clearly wasn't powerful enough to be able to manifest a human form on its own, yet the silver-robed man was able to assist her in doing so, thereby presenting a further indication of his immense powers. Even after adopting a human form, the small beast was still clinging tightly to the silver-robed man while uttering a series of unintelligible syllables. At the same time, she was pointing insistently at the 4 beings who had captured her with a pitiable look on her little face. "All right, I've already taught them a lesson, so that's the end of this matter. Let this be a lesson to you as well. This is what you get for being so disobedient. After we go back, make sure to focus on your cultivation, and I won't let you leave the cave abode until you reach the metamorphosis stage." The man was speaking in a stern voice, but the doting expression on his face made his scolding words completely weightless. The little girl pouted upon hearing this, and a hint of moisture began to well up in her eyes as she threatened to burst into tears. The silver-robed man heaved a resigned sigh, and no longer paid any heed to the little girl as he turned, instead, to the young man beside him. "It's all thanks to you that I was able to recover my beloved daughter, Brother Fei, my Tao companion, and I will repay you for this favor in the future. However, She's currently still waiting at home for further news on our daughter, so I have to go back right away." As his voice trailed off, the silver-robed man cupped his fist in a farewell salute. "In that case, I won't keep you any longer, brother too. I wish you and your daughter a safe and smooth return journey." Seeing as the human-faced worm was willing to spare the four beings who had captured his daughter, the young man heaved an internal sigh of relief. Those four beings were all guest members of the heavenly cloud races, and they were also holy beings as well, so he naturally couldn't allow them to be killed in front of so many people. However, it was also most definitely not in Cloud City's best interest to make the human-faced worm its enemy. Not only was this silver-robed being extremely fearsome, the thought of his immensely powerful Tao companion also sent shivers running down his spine. Otherwise, even if he were acquainted with or even a good friend of the human-faced worm, he definitely wouldn't have led him to this place, and essentially conceded to everyone present that Cloud City was fearful of him. As such, this was about as ideal an outcome as he could hope for. The silver-robed man nodded before turning around, and spiritual light flashed around his body as he prepared to leave. However, right at this moment, the little girl suddenly tugged on his robes and said something that was unintelligible to everyone again, then pointed toward a certain direction in the auction hall. "Oh, is that true?" The spiritual light around the silver-robed man's body faded as a hint of surprise crept into his voice. The young man faltered upon seeing this before asking, "What did your daughter say, brother too?" "It's nothing important. It appears that she may have identified a being here who is somehow related to my Tao companion." The human-faced worm replied as he cast his gaze toward the direction that the little girl was pointing toward. The young man was rather taken aback to hear this, and he also narrowed his eyes as he turned toward that direction. Under the scrutiny of two grand ascension stage beings at once, all of the beings sitting in that direction immediately grew quite uneasy. Even if they knew that this clearly had nothing to do with them, they still couldn't help but feel quite anxious. Han Li's expression also changed slightly, as he knew that the person the little girl was pointing at was most likely himself. However, he had no idea why she singled him out from the crowd. During the exchange that just took place between the silver-robed man and the young man, someone had cast a temporary restriction that allowed everyone to still see everything that was happening on the stage, but not hear what was being said. On top of that, in that instant, an extremely fearsome burst of spiritual sense suddenly swept through this area, and many beings' faces paled as this spiritual sense washed over them. In the instant that this burst of spiritual sense swept past his body, Han Li was also struck by the harrowing sensation that his entire being had been completely bared to the owner of the spiritual sense. This feeling was like being scrutinized by a primordial beast that was too powerful for him to even consider resisting. His heart sank slightly, following which he immediately sensed the silver-robed man's gaze lock onto him from afar. All of a sudden, the man raised a foot, and in the next instant, Han Li felt his vision blur slightly, following which a humanoid figure suddenly appeared before him. It was none other than the silver-robed man, and the little girl that was being held in his arms. The little girl was currently appraising him with curiosity shimmering in her bright eyes, and Han Li immediately rose to his feet. He was feeling quite uneasy, but he still maintained a calm expression as he extended a respectful salute to the silver-robed man. "I pay my respects to Senior too." In the face of a grand ascension stage being, he didn't dare to show any disrespect. Man took an errant glance at Han Li before shaking his head in an aloof manner. "He does indeed possess a hint of aura that belongs to the race that your mother hailed from, but it's very slight. Even if there is some kind of bloodline connection, it's completely negligible. What am I going to do with you? Your mother has so many powerful abilities for you to inherit, but you inherited her most useless sensory ability. Seeing as he doesn't have much of a connection with your mother, let's leave him be." Before the little girl had a chance to say anything, silver light flashed from his body, and he immediately flew out of the auction hall as a streak of silver light. Han Li felt as if he dodged a bullet, and he heaved an internal sigh of relief. He was a full-blood human, so how could he be somehow related to the human-faced worm's Tao companion? Could it be due to the true spirit bloods he'd refined? That wasn't very plausible either. Those true spirit bloods were indeed quite powerful, but after being refined, they'd merely hide in his body on a recessive basis. Otherwise, with all of the powerful beings he'd encountered, at least one of them would have noticed. And Li contemplated this matter for a while, but emerged on the other side just as confused as he was before. Meanwhile, the foreign beings in the nearby area were all appraising him with peculiar expressions. Even the young man with the Fey surname cast a glance toward him, but he didn't say anything. As for body integration stage beings on the upper level, many of them were also appraising him with curiosity in their eyes. Among them, Du and Tianren naturally, immediately recognized Han Li, and a peculiar look also appeared on his face. Meanwhile, Han Li was feeling quite disgruntled by the widespread attention he was suddenly receiving. The young man withdrew his gaze before turning to the Xiao Bui and the elderly man as he said, "All right, seeing as this issue has been resolved, the auction can be continued. I'll be going now. Fellow Taoist Lan, make sure the four of you don't go to the Crepe Myrtle Sea ever again. Otherwise, if something were to happen to you, even I wouldn't be able to do anything." Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D604, letter 1D41E. Letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D696. I'll be sure to keep that in mind, Senior. Thank you for stepping in to save us. Otherwise, we would have been killed for sure. The four beings were naturally filled with gratitude toward the young man. Xiao Bui also bade farewell to him in a respectful manner. The young man nodded before walking down the stage in just a single step. He didn't appear to be moving very quickly, but he exited the auction hall and disappeared in a flash after just a few more steps. Following the departure of the two Grand Ascension stage beings, all of the body integration stage beings returned to the cabins on the upper level again. Everyone else in the hall turned their attention to the people on the stage again, and Xiao Bui turned to the four other beings as he said, "Brother Lan, you're still carrying an injury, so you should go back to your cave abode on focus on your recovery. Mistress Kun, I'll have to trouble the three of you for a while longer. Fortunately, the auction is almost over, so I won't be delaying you for too long. On top of that, I'll be raising your payments by 20% on behalf of our four races." The woman exchanged a glance with her two companions, and a wry smile appeared on her face as she replied, "Rest assured, Brother Xiao, we promise to stay for the duration of the auction, and we certainly plan to see it through to the end." "Thank you." Xiao Bui was ecstatic to hear this. If these three really were to insist on leaving right away, then there was nothing he could do to ask them to stay. As for the bearded elderly man, he merely nodded in response with a thunderous expression on his face before making a grabbing motion with his remaining hand. His dismembered arm immediately hovered toward him at his behest before being carefully stowed away. Immediately thereafter, the elderly man made a hand seal, and a low buzzing sound rang out from the blue formation on the stage, following which he disappeared amid a flash of spiritual light. As a holy race being, the elderly man had always been respected and revered, so it was naturally extremely humiliating for him to have an arm dismembered in front of so many people. As such, he didn't want to remain in the auction hall for even a moment longer, and nor did he want to see anyone for a long time after this. At this moment, Xiao Bui suddenly turned to the brocade-robed man who had retreated to the side of the stage, and smiled as he said, "Due to the unforeseen circumstances that have just unfolded, the last auction item has naturally been cancelled. Fellow Taoist Lu, you may take back your spirit stones. Additionally, in order to compensate you for your loss, if you manage to successfully purchase one of the final three items, then you'll receive a discount of 10 million spirit stones." Thus, he raised a hand and tossed back the bag of spirit stone that had just been issued. The brocade-robed man was clearly afraid that the human-faced worm would turn on him as well, so he'd been standing there in silence, hoping to blend in with the scenery. After hearing Xiao Bui's offer, the man shook his head and sighed, "So be it. The incident that just took place indicates that I have no affinity with this auction. As such, I won't be participating in the rest of this auction." After catching the bag of spirit stones, the man immediately turned and exited the auction hall, quickly disappearing from view thereafter. His departure created a slight stir among the rest of the people in the auction hall. Xiao Bui's brows furrowed slightly before quickly smoothing out as he turned to the green-scaled woman beside him. Following a slight nod from Xiao Bui, the woman reached into her sleeve to pull out a black object before tossing it into the air. All of a sudden, a string of ferocious cries erupted within the auction hall. Immediately thereafter, gale-force winds swept forth in all directions as a black cloud materialized out of thin air. The cloud tumbled and churned violently as it expanded to over 100 feet in size, and such a phenomenon naturally drew the attention of all of the beings below the stage. A burst of screeching rang out incessantly from within the clouds, following which several thunderclaps erupted, and the dark clouds disappeared amid flashes of white lightning. Thus, an inky black flying carriage was instantly revealed. The carriage was around 50 to 60 feet in length, antiquated patterns carved all over its surface, and an ancient aura was emanating from it. The carriage was being drawn by 4 black horned Pegasi, and not only did they each have a pair of black wings, most of their bodies were covered by a layer of black armor. Atop each of these Pegasi was a black armored being that was around as tall as an average human. They were all armed to the teeth with swords and bows strapped to their backs, and all of the Pegasi, as well as their riders, were hovering completely motionlessly in midair, indicating that they were all puppets. The same cold light was emanating from the carriage and the 4 Pegasus riders, and that suggested that they had been refined from the same material. Many people below the stage were quite intrigued by the sight of this carriage and the Pegasus riders. This is the second auction item that has been reserved for our finale, the Infernal Earth Battle Carriage. I won't make an in-depth introduction of this carriage, but I'm sure most of you will have heard about its place of origin. I trust that many of you still recall the Earth Spirit race that was completely eradicated hundreds of thousands of years ago. Back then, they were renowned as the race on the Thunder continent that was most proficient in puppetry. This Infernal Earth Battle Carriage was made by none other than the Earth Spirit race, and it was found at a set of ruins left behind by said race. As for its specific abilities, I won't display them here. All I can tell you is that each of these rider puppets possesses mid-spatial tempering stage power, and when all 4 of them combine their powers, they can unleash a secret technique that has been lost for a long time, and that secret technique is capable of withstanding an attack from an early holy race being. As for the carriage itself, it has countless transformations, and that will have to be explored by the fellow Taoist who ends up purchasing it, Xiao Bui chuckled. Many people were already quite tempted upon hearing that this carriage had been forged by the Earth Spirit race, and after learning that the 4 puppet riders could even keep an early holy race being at bay, all of them were ecstatic. There were even some people who swept their spiritual sense toward the carriage for a closer inspection, only to be given a massive fright before hurriedly withdrawing their spiritual sense. As it turned out, as soon as their spiritual sense came into contact with the flying carriage, a strange burst of suction force suddenly erupted from it that forcibly sucked their spiritual sense into the carriage. This was naturally quite a startling development. Perhaps it was due to the fact that the carriage still had no owner as of yet, but all of them were able to withdraw their spiritual sense without any impediment. Otherwise, they really would have been in a rather sticky situation. As such, it was verified that this carriage did indeed possess some extraordinary abilities, and it drew even more interest from prospective bidders. Han Li was among the beings who had swept his spiritual sense toward the carriage, and he had also developed a sense of curiosity toward it. However, he then immediately heaved a forlorn internal sigh. The starting price of the carriage hadn't yet been announced, but it was surely going to be very high, seeing as this was a treasure capable of keeping even an early holy race being at bay. As such, he would simply have to act as a spectator while others bid of the carriage. However, the golden lightning bamboo still hadn't appeared yet, which meant that in the eyes of the auction house, it was even more important than this carriage and that spirit beast from earlier. Just as these thoughts were running through Han Li's mind, Xiao Bui finally announced the starting prices for this carriage. The starting price for this Infernal Earth Battle Carriage will be 120 million spirit stones. Han Li knew that the starting price was going to be quite a staggering one, but he was still taken aback by this massive sum. As expected, bidding for this Infernal Earth Battle Carriage was extremely intense, and the price was quickly bid up to over 200 million spirit stones. Even so, there were many people who were unwilling to give up. However, on this occasion, there weren't many holy race beings from the upper level who participated in the bidding. A few of them placed a bid here and there, but all of them gave up on the carriage after the price exceeded 200 million. In the end, the carriage was secured by a graceful woman with a veil over her face for the price of 220 million spirit stones. This drew a sense of bewilderment from many of the beings present, as this woman appeared to only be at the mid-deity transformation stage, so it was quite incredible that she'd be in possession of such a huge sum of spirit stones. Han Li was also rather surprised to see this, but he quickly cast these thoughts aside as the next auction item was a section of green bamboo. It was none other than the golden lightning bamboo that he'd offered to the auction house. This is a section of golden lightning bamboo, the source of the paramount wood attribute divine lightning. The starting price is 70 million. Xiao Bui's introduction was quite concise on this occasion, and he picked up the section of bamboo as he spoke before waving it toward the people below the stage. A loud thunderclap rang out as countless arcs of golden lightning erupted from the section of bamboo at once, instantly forming a large golden net of lightning. Golden lightning bamboo. Divine devilbane lightning. Paramount wood attribute divine lightning. Cries of surprise and elation immediately rang out, and some of them had even come directly from the upper level. Many people's expressions changed drastically at the sight of the golden lightning net, and a massive stir ran through the entire auction hall. Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged, but he was quite delighted by this reaction. It was quite clear that this golden lightning bamboo was even more precious than he'd originally thought. But then again, even though he'd already mastered the lightning wheel technique, he still couldn't help but feel that there seemed to be something else hidden within the golden lightning bamboo. Otherwise, the demon monarchs of the earth abyss wouldn't have been so wary of this divine devilbane lightning. Unfortunately, the demon monarchs were merely using him as a tool at the time, so even if the golden lightning bamboo were harboring some other secrets, they naturally wouldn't tell him about it. Han Li had searched through the flying spirit race in Cloud City, but there weren't many tomes that he could find that were related to the golden lightning bamboo and divine devilbane lightning. As such, he could only give up in his search for now and hope that an answer would present itself to him later on. Just as these thoughts were racing through Han Li's mind, bidding had already begun on the golden lightning bamboo. All of a sudden, a holy race being on the upper level made a staggering bid of 250 million spirit stones, effectively scaring off many prospective bidders. However, that holy race being definitely wasn't the only one with a massive budget. Almost immediately thereafter, bids of 260 million and 270 million were made by two other holy race beings on the upper level. The voice of one of the bidders was rather familiar to Han Li, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he realized that it was Xianxia. This elder of the myriad ancient race had also set his sights on that section of golden lightning bamboo. As for the other bidder, it was the man with the Lai surname who had raised his skepticism toward the flawed glazed heavenly flame liquid earlier. These two beings made one bid after another, and all of the other prospective bidders could only look on in disappointment and yearning toward the golden lightning bamboo on the stage. All of a sudden, the atmosphere in the auction hall became a little tense and oppressive. 300 million. After a brief silence, the holy race being who had earlier made the bid of 250 million finally placed another bid, and Han Li's heart skipped a beat upon hearing this astonishing price. This time, Xianxia heaved a forlorn sigh and remained silent. 310 million. Fellow Taoist Jing, you're the one bidding against me, right? This section of golden lightning bamboo is extremely important to me, so I hope that you can relinquish it to me. The man with the Lai surname made another after a brief hesitation before directing a polite request toward the other bidder. However, the man with the Jing surname had no intention of giving up, and he chuckled. I don't think so, brother Lai. The golden lightning bamboo is also extremely important to me, which is why I'm willing to place such a high bid for it. I won't be handing it over to anyone. 320 million. All right, in that case, I'll hand over the golden lightning bamboo to you, brother Jing. The man with the Lai surname seemed to be aware of how wealthy his competitor was, so he also gave up following a wistful sigh. He, you have my thanks, brother Lai. The man with the Jing surname replied in a triumphant voice, but he was quickly stumped by the scenes that unfolded next. 330 million. A bid was made by someone on the lower level. This was a pleasant female voice, and many people faltered upon hearing this before turning toward that direction, only to find that the bidder was none other than the same woman who had purchased the infernal earth battle carriage. Everyone was quite stunned to see this, including Han Li. She had already spent such a massive sum of spirit stones earlier, yet she was still able to make such an astronomical bid. That was insane. Of course, this didn't truly indicate that her wealth exceeded that of a holy race being, but at the very least, she possessed far more spirit stones than the average holy race being. 340 million. The man with the Jing surname continued in a dark voice. 350 million. The woman countered in an unhurried manner. The man with the Jing surname fell silent once again, but after a brief moment he made another bid in a frosty voice. 360 million. If anyone can make a higher bid than this, then even I won't be able to keep up. As soon as his voice fell, the woman made another bid in an extremely calm manner. 370 million. A burst of enraged and incredulous laughter rang out from the cabin that the man with the Jing surname was situated in. Good. Seeing as you're so intent on securing this golden lightning bamboo, then I can only wish you a safe trip when you depart from Cloud City. After being provoked over and over again by an upper race being, this holy race being finally couldn't repress his fury any longer and delivered a barely concealed threat. However, the woman completely ignored him as if she hadn't even heard what was being said. After Xiao Bui announced that she had successfully placed the final bid for the auction item, she made her way onto the stage in an unhurried manner, then issued the required spirit stones in exchange for the golden lightning bamboo before returning to her seat. The fearlessness being displayed by the woman evoked a sense of wariness in the heart of the man with the Jing surname, and he merely chuckled coldly before falling silent. All right, we have now reached the grand finale of the auction, so allow me to present our most precious auction item. I'm sure all of you know what it is already. The final auction item is a vial of 13 myriad wonder pills. I'm sure I don't need to elaborate much on the extraordinary effects of myriad wonder pills. Not only are they ideal for breakthroughs to the holy race, consumption of the pill can cleanse one's essence and enhance one's constitution. In the past, myriad wonder pills have been sold during prior auctions, but they've never been sold in batches of more than 3 or 4 at once. In all honesty, even I was quite stunned that the elders of the crystal race were willing to offer so many myriad wonder pills to be sold during this auction. If it weren't for the fact that I'm hosting this auction, perhaps I would participate in the bidding as well. I won't be able to use them for myself, but these pills would be more than ideal for a junior or disciple of mine, Xiao Bui said with a forlorn look on his face. After that, he accepted a faint silver vial from one of the armored beings on the stage, then raised it high above his head. The holy race beings on the upper level may not have been overly tempted by these pills, but the beings on the lower and middle levels were all staring intently at the silver vial in Xiao Bui's hand with scorching desire in their eyes. All of them either wore solemn expressions, or ones of unbridled excitement or anxiety. All right, that's enough rambling from me. Without further ado, the starting price for this vial of myriad wonder pills is 300 million, Xiao Bui announced with a smile. After hearing this starting price, Han Li stroked his chin and crossing his arms, then leaned back into his seat expressionlessly before closing his eyes. At this moment, Han Li's mind had completely drifted away from the vial of myriad wonder pills before offered on the stage. Instead, he was contemplating how he could get his hands on its refinement method. If the ingredients used were all plant-based items, then he could refine countless such pills for himself. If these myriad wonder pills really were as extraordinary as everyone proclaimed, then with the assistance of the true spirit bloods within his body, there was a very good chance that he'd be able to break through to the body integration stage through consuming these pills. Thus, Han Li fell into deep thought. Close to a day later, within the secret chamber of his cave abode on Dreamcloud Mountain, Han Li sat in a cross-legged manner with a faint blue pouch in one hand and a small white vial in the other. He bounced the pouch up and down in his hand as a faint smile appeared on his face. This pouch naturally contained the top-grade spirit stones that he'd received from the 4 races auction, and they were most likely sufficient to cover close to half of the costs incurred by using the super teleportation formation. If Kai Liting really were willing to issue the other half of the costs, then he'd most likely be able to gather the remaining sum of spirit stones quite easily. The last time he'd attended an auction was back in Deep Heaven City of the human race, and he'd clearly underestimated just how wealthy foreign beings from other continents were. Thus, the costs required to use the super teleportation formation were no longer a problem to him. All he had to next was to travel to the vast glacial realm, gather the tool refinement material for the stone cocoon race, secure the designated treasures for Kai Liting and Duan Tianren, and he'd be able to teleport back to the Tian Yuan continent thereafter. On top of that, his trip to the vast glacial realm would be a brilliant opportunity for him to break through a bottleneck. As such, it would be very much in his best interest to cultivate to the pinnacle of the early spatial tempering stage. In that case, he'd be able to use the vast abundance of spiritual qi in the vast glacial realm to facilitate a breakthrough to the mid-spatial tempering stage. These thoughts raced rapidly through Han Li's mind, and he carefully reevaluated his plan before finally heaving a long sigh after ascertaining that there were no issues with his projected course of action. Spiritual light then flashed from one of his hands, and the pouch of spirit stones instantly disappeared. After that, Han Li turned his gaze toward the small white vial. This was naturally the vial that contained the flawed glazed heavenly flame liquid. Compared to the auction items that had been reserved for the finale, this spirit liquid had been a lot cheaper. However, Qing Yuanzi had promised him some divine infernal river elixir, so Han Li had been extremely diligent when it came to gathering the items on Qing Yuanzi's list. This spiritual liquid was flawed, yet Xiao Bui proclaimed that it still possessed all of the abilities of a perfectly refined batch of the same spirit liquid, just to a significantly lesser degree. Of course, Han Li wasn't going to just take his word for it. He naturally had to conduct an examination for himself to verify if this was indeed the case. Otherwise, if he were to present something to Qing Yuanzi that was completely useless, then the latter certainly wasn't going to be happy. Thus, Han Li appraised the jade vial in his hand in deep thought, before suddenly opening his mouth to expel a ball of silver flames. The ball of silver flames revolved around Han Li before a crisp cry rang out, and it transformed into a silver fire raven. Han Li then immediately tossed the jade vial into the air, then pointed a finger toward it. A dull thump rang out as the runes on the surface of the vial's lid flashed, following which it flew off of its own accord. All of a sudden, brilliant red light flashed from the opening of the vial, and a pillar of crimson flames erupted from within. At the same time, a ball of red liquid slowly hovered out of the vial. The entire secret chamber was immediately illuminated by red light, and scorching heat waves rolled directly toward Han Li, making him feel as if he'd been thrown directly into a furnace. At this moment, the spirit engulfing fire raven suddenly became extremely excited at the sight of the ball of red liquid, and it let loose an elated cry before spreading its wings and flying toward it before Han Li had even given it any instructions. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, and he immediately made a hand seal to stop the spirit engulfing fire raven cold in its tracks. The fire raven let loose a reluctant cry before revolving around the ball of spirit liquid in a wistful manner. Prior to deciding how he was going to use this flawed batch of spirit liquid, he naturally wasn't going to allow his spirit engulfing fire raven to devour it. He had only summoned the fire raven so it could assist him in testing the efficacy of the glazed heavenly flame liquid. Han Li flicked his 10 fingers through the air in rapid succession, casting a series of incantation seals of different colors toward the ball of spirit liquid. Some of these incantation seals disappeared into the ball of liquid in a flash, while others were repelled amid flashes of red light. There were also some incantation seals that struck the ball of liquid with rumbling booms akin to dull thunderclaps, and Han Li's expression changed incessantly as he witnessed the spirit liquid's reactions to the incantation seals he'd cast toward it. After the final white incantation seal struck the ball of liquid and exploded into a cloud of white mist, Han Li suddenly stopped what he was doing as he stroked his chin with a contemplative look on his face. A few moments later, he suddenly flipped a hand over to summon a set of extremely intricate formation flags. These flags were only several inches in size each, and as he raised a hand, they transformed into several streaks of spiritual light that shot forth through the air before abruptly disappearing. A light formation that was around 10 feet in size appeared in their place. This was a 5-colored light formation that had a wide top and a narrow bottom, making it resemble a massive funnel. There was a series of runes of different sizes flashing near the light formation, giving it a very mysterious appearance. Han Li let loose a low cry before making a grabbing motion toward the ball of fiery liquid that was hovering in midair, and it was instantly thrust into the light formation. In the instant that the ball of liquid entered the formation, a low buzzing sound suddenly rang out from within the light formation, following which a 5-colored light barrier that encompassed the entire formation appeared. Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he flicked his 10 fingers toward the light formation, and a series of thin, translucent threads shot forth from his fingertips before disappearing into the light barrier up ahead. Han Li then curled his fingers inward slightly, and the translucent threads completely straightened out in response. He began to chant something, and a film of light began to revolve around the translucent threads, as if something were being transmitted toward them from the light formation. Han Li stared at the translucent threads with an intense, unblinking gaze. What he was unleashing now was a secret technique that had been invented by the monarch of soul divergence, and the technique allowed him to combine the power of his spiritual sense with this formation in a synergistic manner. Not only could the power of his spiritual sense be amplified significantly within the formation, the secret technique also possessed some other incredible effects that could be directly applied to the items within the formation. Letter 1d68f, letter 1d563, letter 1d556, letter 1d680, letter 1d680, letter 1d680, letter 1d554, letter 1d428, letter 1d55e. The 10 translucent threads that had been manifested from the power of Han Li's spiritual sense began to tremor slightly at his behest. At the same time, the light swirling around the translucent threads began to fluctuate in brightness. If someone could see through the 5-colored light barrier around the formation, then they'd be greeted by the sight of the ball of glazed heavenly flame liquid revolving rapidly at the center of the light formation. There were countless runes of different sizes in the nearby area, and they were plunging themselves into the ball of fiery liquid in a frenzy. At the same time, there were countless other runes surging incessantly out of the ball of spirit liquid. The rapid entry and exit of runes made the red light around the ball of liquid tumble and churn incessantly, as if it had reached its boiling point. After a while, Han Li's expression finally changed, and some kind of outcome seemed to have been reached. After a brief hesitation, he flicked his 10 fingers through the air again, and the 10 translucent threads shattered in unison. Immediately thereafter, he made a hand seal, and a loud buzzing sound rang out from within the light formation. 5-colored light surged as a ball of fiery liquid that had shrunk significantly in size flew up into the air and out of the light barrier. Han Li wore a serious expression as he pointed a finger at the ball of fiery liquid from afar, and the spirit engulfing fire raven appeared beside it in a flash before devouring the ball of liquid. The fire raven then let loose a cry of elation as it turned around and flew directly toward Han Li. It transformed into a fireball mid-flight before disappearing into his body. Han Li took a deep breath before abruptly waving a sleeve through the air, and a swath of azure light swept forth. As the azure light passed through the 5-colored light barrier, the latter gradually dissolved away to reveal the light formation within. Han Li waved a hand toward the light formation in an expressionless manner, and several streaks of spiritual light shot forth from within before reverting back to a stack of formation flags that gently fluttered downward. Han Li swept a sleeve toward the formation flags, and they disappeared amid a flash of spiritual light. The light formation in the distance also rapidly disappeared in a soundless manner. Moments later, the only thing that was left hovering in midair was a fist-sized ball of fiery liquid. Han Li waved a hand toward the ball of liquid, and the white jade vial appeared above it in a flash. The vial tipped itself over before a swath of light surged out of its opening, then drew the ball of spirit liquid into the vial. After sealing and stowing away the vial, Han Li closed his eyes as he sat down with his legs crossed in a motionless manner. However, from his tightly furrowed brows and his indecisive expression, it could be deduced that he was grappling with some kind of difficult decision. A short while later, his furrowed brows smoothed out as he opened his eyes again, then suddenly extended a hand. A ball of silver flames emerged over the center of his palm, and Han Li narrowed his eyes as a small crimson flame suddenly appeared within the ball of silver flames. After praising the wisp of red flames for a short while, Han Li opened his mouth to expel a ball of azure light. An incredible scene ensued. As soon as the ball of silver flames came into contact with the azure light, the former abruptly exploded. Immediately thereafter, a ball of silver flames that was around 10 times the size of the original one appeared in its place. Han Li nodded upon seeing this before opening his mouth, and the massive fireball was instantly devoured by him as a streak of silver flames. Looks like this flawed spirit liquid really does possess all of the main functions of a perfectly refined batch of glazed heavenly flame liquid. The only problem is that there are a few types of unknown impurities intermingled into the liquid. I wonder if this will be enough to satisfy that man. After devouring this thing, the spirit engulfing heavenly flame has gained the ability to draw upon pure spiritual qi in order to temporarily enhance its own powers. With a sufficient supply of spiritual power, it could even enhance its own power by twofold in battle, Han Li murmured to himself. After that, Han Li meditated for a while longer while contemplating what he had seen during the 4 races auctions. After ascertaining that he didn't seem to have done anything wrong, he heaved a long sigh before pulling out a small vial and tipping out a rising dragon pill for consumption. Immediately thereafter, Han Li began to focus on his cultivation. The time for the opening of the vast glacial realm wasn't set, so the day could arrive as long as a century later or as short as just a few years later. As such, he naturally had to focus as much of his time on cultivation as possible. Even if he didn't want to use the abundant spiritual chi in the vast glacial realm to break through a bottleneck, it would certainly be in his best interest to become more powerful before entering the perilous realm. 3 months later, Han Li was still situated in the same secret chamber with his Provenance True Devil projection behind him, and he was making a hand seal while engaging in arduous cultivation. However, moments later, his expression suddenly changed slightly, and the golden light around his body abruptly faded. He rustled his sleeve, and a jade badge flew out from within amid a flash of spiritual light. The badge circled around in the air before landing in his grasp, revealing itself to be a myriad distance talisman. The surface of the talisman was shimmering with spiritual light, and rows of ant-sized text were gradually appearing on it. Han Li took a glance at it and murmured to himself, "So it's already opened. Looks like I'll have to make a trip there then." Thus, he stowed the myriad distance talisman away before emerging from his secret chamber. Several hours later, Han Li disembarked from a beast-drawn carriage and arrived on a street that he'd already been to once before. He looked around before immediately making his way toward a nearby shop. Strangely enough, the doors of the shop were tightly shut, and it didn't seem to be open to any customers. However, Han Li paid no heed to this as he strode over to the door before raising a hand, casting an incantation seal that flew directly through the door and into the shop. Moments later, the door was opened from the inside, and Han Li strode into the shop to find a woman with a shimmering white crystal on her glabella waiting for him in there. It was none other than the crystal woman, Xianxia. Xianxia extended a respectful curtsy with a smile on her face as she greeted, "Welcome, Senior. I didn't think that you'd get here so quickly, so I didn't head out to greet you. I hope you may forgive me." Cultivators like us aren't fixated on such trivial formalities anyway. I came here as soon as I received notification from you," Han Li replied with a faint smile. Xianxia smiled and continued, "This isn't a good place to talk, Senior. Let's continue this in my secret space. There's another fellow Taoist waiting for us in there, and I'd like to introduce him to you." Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, but he merely nodded without saying anything. Xianxia closed the doors to her shop again, then flipped a hand over to produce a formation plate. She made a hand seal and began to chant something while pointing a finger at the formation plate. Brilliant light instantly flashed from the formation plate, following which a vast expanse of 5-colored light swept forth in all directions, enshrouding Han Li and the woman within. This 5-colored light then swirled before forming a 5-colored light formation. In the next instant, Han Li felt his surroundings blur, following which he found himself in a murky gray space. This was none other than the private spatial rift that Xianxia had opened up. Han Li looked around and immediately caught sight of a humanoid figure that was standing nearby. "I pay my respects to Senior Han," the humanoid figure greeted in a polite manner as he cupped his fist in a respectful salute. Han Li inspected the humanoid figure through narrowed eyes to discover that this was a muscle-bound black-robed man with several faint purple scars on his face. His entire body was emanating a fierce aura, and after sweeping his spiritual sense toward the man, Han Li discovered that he was a mid-deity transformation cultivator. "What can I refer to you as, fellow Taoist?" Han Li asked in a calm voice as he emerged from the teleportation formation. "My name is Yue Zong," the man replied. "Brother Yue is the most renowned devilish beast hunter in the Golden Devil mountain ranges. If we want to have a smooth trip into the mountain ranges, we'll have to enlist the help of fellow Taoist Yue's abilities," Xianxia explained. "Devilish beast hunter, does that mean you enter the Golden Devil mountain ranges quite often?" Han Li asked with a curious look on his face. "I've entered the Golden Devil mountain ranges on a total of 37 occasions, and I've ventured deep into the mountain ranges on 7 of those occasions," Yue Zong replied in a respectful manner. 37. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. Seeing as he had promised that he would enter the Golden Devil mountain ranges with Xianxia, he had naturally conducted some research into the mountain ranges beforehand. Thus, he discovered that the mountain ranges were even more perilous than Xianxia had made them out to be, and all of the beings who still dared to enter the mountain ranges at this point were brave and skilled adventurers. However, even those beings didn't dare to venture deep into the mountain ranges, and they'd only roam around the outskirts to kill some relatively weaker devilish beasts. Yet much to his surprise, this Yue Zong was only at the mid-deity transformation stage, but had ventured deep into the Golden Devil Mountain on several occasions. He didn't know just how deep into the mountain ranges Yue Zong had gone on those occasions, but this was still quite an astonishing feat. At this moment, Xianxia explained, even though we won't need to venture deep into the mountain ranges during this trip, the place we'll be going to is still quite far away from the entrance to the mountain ranges, and it would be rather perilous for us if we were to encounter any powerful devilish beasts that may be lurking in the outskirts. Hence, I hired Brother Yue as our guide as a safety precaution. With him leading the way, I'm sure we'll enjoy a smooth journey. Brother Yue is one of the very few beings who are able to detect the locations of powerful devilish beasts in advance, even with the disruption presented by the devilish qi in the mountain ranges. You're far too kind, fair Xian. I certainly wouldn't dare to guarantee a smooth journey, and I haven't entered the Golden Devil Mountain ranges for a long time as well, so I don't know if any drastic changes have taken place in there. After all, the last time I entered the mountain ranges was about a century ago, Yue Zong replied in a modest manner. What could have possibly changed in a mere century? You're extremely renowned for your exploits in the Golden Devil Mountain ranges, and we're only going to be venturing into the outskirts on this occasion, so surely there's very little that we'll have to worry about, Xianxia said with a smile. That's not necessarily the case, Fairy Xian. The Golden Devil Mountain ranges aren't just fearsome due to the powerful devilish beasts in there. In addition to those, its terrain changes almost every single day due to the devilish qi that had gathered there over countless years. Due to the presence of this devilish qi, a plot of empty land that had been extremely safe the day before could transform into a tall mountain filled with all types of devilish beasts the very next day. To some devilish beasts, changing the terrain within the mountain ranges is a simple task. If it weren't for the facts that we're only going to be exploring the outskirts of the mountain ranges, and that I really need that vial of myriad-year Zoysia spirit liquid, I wouldn't have agreed to take this risk no matter what, Yue Zong said with a serious expression. Xianxia's expression changed slightly upon hearing this before a warm smile appeared on her face as she said, Rest assured, fellow Taoist Yue, we'll only be traveling through the outskirts, and there's no way that we'll venture deep into the mountain ranges. My cultivation base is far inferior to yours, so I certainly wouldn't dare to go any deeper into the mountain ranges than necessary. Yue Zong's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and after a brief pause he continued, That would be best. Also, as we discussed earlier, I'll only be responsible for acting as your guide and helping to battle any devilish beasts that we may encounter along the way. Aside from that, I won't be assisting you and Senior Han in any other areas. You have no issues with that, right, Fairy Xian? None at all. If we really do encounter some situations where further assistance is required from you, I'm willing to offer additional rewards, and I definitely won't force you to do anything against your will. Xian nodded in response, but she didn't completely agree to this. Yue Zong contemplated her response for a short while before conceding with a slight nod. Meanwhile, Han Li remained silent this entire time as he carefully appraised Yue Zong, and only at the conclusion of his conversation with Xian did he finally interject. In all honesty, my understanding of the Golden Devil Mountain ranges and devilish beasts is very lackluster. I've only learned about some of these aspects by asking others and reading some relevant tomes. As such, I'm very glad that Fairy Xian was able to invite someone as familiar with the mountain ranges as fellow Taoist Yue. However, I have a few questions surrounding the Golden Devil Mountain ranges, and I was hoping you'd be able to answer them, fellow Taoist Yue. Please state any question that you may have, and I'll be sure to tell you everything that I know, Senior Han, Yue Zong immediately replied. Setting aside the high-grade devilish beasts in the mountain ranges, have the mid-grade and low-grade devilish beasts also attained intelligence? If so, how does their intelligence compare with that of normal spirit beasts? Also, Han Li immediately rattled off a list of questions. Letter 1D487, letter 1D493, letter 1D65A, letter 1D486, letter 1D500, letter 1D4E. Letter 1D4EC, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. Yue Zong displayed his vast wealth of knowledge of the Golden Devil Mountain ranges, providing detailed responses to all of Han Li's questions, and Xian also interjected from time to time with questions of her own. The atmosphere between the three of them was quite harmonious, and they talked for close to an hour before Han Li was finally satisfied. After receiving an answer to his final question, a smile appeared on Han Li's face as he said, With all of this knowledge, I'm sure our trip will be quite a smooth one. When do you plan on setting off, fellow Taoist Xian? Xianxia considered the question momentarily before replying. The Golden Devil mountain ranges are about a month's travel away from our Cloud City, so we won't be able to delay for too much longer. I think we should set off in 3 days. What do you think, Senior? Henley stroked his chin as he replied. All right, we'll do as you say. 3 days from now, let's meet up 5 kilometers outside of the eastern gates. Yu Zong nodded in response, stating no objections to this proposal. Henley had no intention of staying any longer, and he bade everyone farewell as he said, if that's everything that needs to be discussed, then I have to go back and make some preparations now. We've discussed everything that needs to be said, so you're certainly free to leave, Senior Han. Xianxia replied in a respectful manner before flipping a hand over to summon her formation plate again. Thus, Hanli stepped onto the teleportation formation and disappeared amid a flash of spiritual light. Immediately following Hanli's departure, Yue Zong heaved a reflexive sigh of relief before his brows furrowed as he asked, Fellow Taoist Xian, is this Senior Han really trustworthy? You say that he's a high-grade devilish cultivator, but I don't sense any devilish aura emanating from his body. I've explored the Golden Devil mountain ranges on many occasions, and I'm quite confident in my ability to sense devilish qi, so could it be possible that he's lying? Rest assured, Brother Yue, I can guarantee that Senior Han is indeed a high-grade devilish cultivator. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he was a devilish cultivator, I may not have been able to tempt him into coming with us. But then again, if it weren't for the fact that a high-grade devilish cultivator was required for our plans, I wouldn't have had to wait for so long, Xianxia confirmed with a faint sigh. Yue Zong was silent for a moment before suddenly asking, in that case, this Senior Han must be using some kind of mysterious cultivation art that can mask his devilish qi. Otherwise, there's no way that my sensory ability would completely fail to detect any devilish aura from him. Aside from that, I don't know what your objective for this trip is, but seeing as it requires the accompaniment of a high-grade devilish cultivator, I can only presume that it's not something simple. On top of that, it really is a bad idea to be entering the Golden Devil mountain ranges this year. This should be the time during which an influx of devilish qi will be pouring into the mountain ranges once every 300 years, and during this 10-year period, there's a high chance that the powerful devilish beasts in the mountain ranges will appear in the outskirts. Why don't you wait for a further 4 or 5 years instead? My apologies, but I have my secrets, and I cannot reveal them to you. In any case, I have to enter the Golden Devil mountain ranges within these 2 years. Otherwise, I'll have to wait for several more centuries for another opportunity. I simply can't afford to wait that long, so I have no choice but to take this risk. However, it's exactly because of this that I was willing to offer a vial of myriad-year Xianxia spirit liquid in exchange for your services. Truth be told, I went to several other people before you in the hope of employing their services, but none of them were willing to enter the Golden Devil mountain ranges during this period of devilish qi influx, so I had no choice but to come to you, Xianxia admitted with a wry smile after a brief hesitation. In that case, I'll have to take the risk with you then, Fairy Xian. However, let me make this clear first. During this period of devilish qi influx, I'm only 70% to 80% confident that I'll be able to guide you safely to your destination. If mishaps arise or we encounter some powerful devilish beasts or some other incident occurs that will pose a threat to our lives, then I'll be fleeing the scene right away. On top of that, you'll have to give me the other half vial of Xianxia spirit liquid that you promised me as well, Yue Zong reminded in a serious voice. Of course, these terms were all confirmed in advance, so I naturally won't go back on my word, Xianxia replied with a smile. Yue Zong nodded before narrowing his eyes as he asked, from the looks of it, you don't seem to have told Senior Han about the devilish qi influx that's currently taking place in the Golden Devil mountain ranges. Won't that be problematic? I'm taking Senior Han with us because I need to borrow his Devil Dao abilities, and that has nothing to do with the influx of devilish qi. Even you can't guide us safely in and out of the Golden Devil mountain ranges, then the outcome will remain the same regardless of whether I inform Senior Han or not. He'll know about this sooner or later anyway, Xianxia replied with a sly look on her eyes. That's true. However, if you were to tell him in advance, then you most likely wouldn't have been able to convince Senior Han to come with us. Yue Zong chuckled with a knowing expression. Xianxia merely smiled upon hearing this and offered no response. After that, she and Yue Zong discussed some other details before Yue Zong was also sent away by the teleportation formation. Thus, Xianxia was the only one left in the spatial rift. The smile on her face gradually faded, and her brows furrowed slightly as she suddenly waved a sleeve through the air. A ball of azure light immediately flew out from within, then transformed into a fist-sized azure beast in a flash. The small beast had scales all over its body and sharp claws attached to its four limbs. There was a pair of horns on its head. It had a mouthful of sharp fangs, giving it an identical appearance to a true spirit Kirin. However, the small beast's body was extremely indistinct and insubstantial, looking as if it could be dispersed by nothing more than a gentle breeze. Are you sure that place will be opening within these 2 years? Make sure you haven't miscalculated the date. If you're off even by just a few years, I'll be taking this risk for nothing, and I'll be missing out on a brilliant opportunity, Xianxia asked in a serious voice as she appraised the Kirin projection before her. You still not believe me even now? When have I provided you with false guidance? If it weren't for the rewards that you reaped from the other set of ruins I told you about, you wouldn't even be at where you are today. With the limited cultivation aptitude of you crystal beings, you can already be considered to be a supreme prodigy by reaching this point after just a few centuries of cultivation. The Kirin projection replied as it raised its head in a lazy manner. From the day that I was born, you were born with me, and if I were to die, you would suffer the same fate, so of course I believe you. It's just you're merely a wisp of the soul of the true spirit Kirin from back then, so it wouldn't be impossible that your memory has been jumbled or rearranged. I'm simply feeling a little uneasy, Xianxia said as she appraised the miniature Kirin. I am indeed only 100,000ths of that true spirit Kirin's spiritual sense after it had self-detonated. But back then, it had been forced to the brink of death by its sworn enemies, and it wouldn't have been able to escape had it not detonated its own soul. Even though it unleashed an ability that defied the natural order to split its soul into 100,000 fragments, it has implanted a few extremely important pieces of information into every single fragment of its soul so it can have a chance of returning to its former power. I can assure you that the information regarding that true spirit cave is most definitely one of those pieces of information, so there's no way that I'll miscalculate, the miniature Kirin chuckled. Indeed, it's all thanks to you that I was able to reach my current cultivation base. However, you only adhered to my infant self to try and take over my body and reincarnate yourself. I don't know why you failed to do so in the end, but you certainly didn't harbor good intentions toward me in the beginning, Xianxia countered with a faint smile. Spiritual light flashed erratically around the miniature Kirin upon hearing this, and its mood seemed to have soured significantly. Why are you still mentioning that? I failed in the end, didn't I? It's a stroke of terrible luck that I decided to adhere to your body. Otherwise, if I had chosen someone else at the time, perhaps I'd have been freed long ago. HMPH, do you really think I don't know what happened back then? At the time in the village that I was born, I was the only baby that was yet to be born. You must have thought that an unborn baby with cognitive functions that were yet to be fully developed would have been an easy vessel for you to take over, Xianxia chuckled. At the time, I had used up almost all of my power just to escape, so of course I was going to choose the easiest target to try and possess. Otherwise, even just 100,000ths of a true spirit being's spiritual sense is more than powerful enough to take over the body of a mature crystal being. The miniature Kirin grumbled in a resigned manner. All right, let's not bicker about this any longer. Even though you weren't able to successfully reincarnate yourself, the fact of the matter is that you did manage to survive. Entering the true spirit cave will be extremely beneficial for both of us, so we have to ensure that nothing goes wrong. It's unfortunate that I've reached a bottleneck in my cultivation and may not be able to make any progress even in the next few centuries. Otherwise, I would have waited until I was powerful enough before setting off in search of that true spirit cave. That would undoubtedly take a long time, but it would certainly be safer than entering the Golden Devil Mountain ranges with these two beings who are both far more powerful than I am, Xianxia mused in a contemplative manner. You crystal beings really do possess very ordinary cultivation aptitude. Even with my guidance and after taking so many precious pills, it would still be impossible for you to progress at the miraculous rate you enjoyed in the past. As such, it wouldn't do you any good to delay for so much longer. Then again, if it weren't for the fact that the true spirit cave just so happened to have been occupied by that wounded holy-grade devilish beast, it would have definitely been better for you to go there alone. The Kirin projection paused momentarily before continuing, but rest assured, you've already prepared measures to counteract those beings, haven't you? It would be best if they didn't try to plot against you, but if they did, then you could unleash those measures, and even ordinary beings who are far more powerful than you would be susceptible. Ordinary beings? Are you implying that one of them isn't an ordinary being? Does that mean there's a chance that those measures won't work on them? The crystal woman was extremely intelligent and was immediately able to read between the lines. You've come into those two beings twice already, and even though I've been hiding in your body on those occasions, I was still able to sense some things. That Yue Zhang's aura fluctuates in power, and upon closer inspection, I can sense some baleful qi lurking within his body. If I'm not mistaken, he must be using some kind of cultivation art that specializes in concealment and unleashing lethal attacks with the aim of killing his target with a single strike. Of course, he must have cultivated some other abilities and secret techniques as well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to venture into the Golden Devil Mountain ranges so many times and still remain unscathed. However, in contrast, that Han Li is a lot more unsettling. Not only does his cultivation base far outstrip that of Yue Zhang, his cultivation arts and abilities are all very profound. Even I'm struck by a sense of peril in his presence, but the measures I've prepared for you are all the most effective ones that you can use at your current cultivation base. In particular, the life-saving measures are extremely profound and unpredictable, so even if you can't kill the two of them on the spot, you'll still be able to escape with ease, the Kirin projection replied in a confident manner. In that case, I'm feeling quite reassured. However, there's something else that I'm more worried about, Xianxia sighed as a peculiar look flashed through her eyes. Oh, what is it? The miniature Kirin asked. When that Kirin self-detonated its soul all those years ago, it was split into 100,000 fragments, so surely you're not the only one that managed to escape and is aware of the location of the True Spirit Cave. Hundreds of years have passed since then, so perhaps someone's already accessed the cave and taken all of the benefits for themselves, thereby rendering our efforts completely futile, Xianxia speculated. The Krin's soul was indeed split up into many fragments, but very few of them actually managed to escape. Among those, a large proportion would have failed to possess a host or encountered some other kind of mishap, so it really is rather difficult to say whether other soul fragments like me still exist. As such, I think it's quite unlikely that someone would have already accessed the cave, the Kirin projection replied in a solemn voice. I hope that's the case. If we can secure the benefits in the True Spirit Cave, then I'll be able to progress at a rapid rate in my cultivation, Xianxia murmured to herself. That would indeed be the case. Otherwise, I wouldn't have retained this piece of information so clearly, the Kirin projection chuckled. Xianxia merely smiled upon hearing this, but didn't offer any reply. After revolving around her for a while, the miniature Kirin suddenly said, that Han Li possesses quite a powerful spiritual sense, so when you're with him, try not to contact me if you can avoid it. Otherwise, there's a chance that he may discover that something's amiss. Ideally, the next time that I appear would be when we're already situated in the True Spirit Cave. After that, the Kirin projection flew toward the Xianxia's body and abruptly disappeared. Xianxia heaved a faint sigh before also making her way into the teleportation formation. She waved the formation plate in her hand and disappeared amid a flash of spiritual light. 3 days later, on the summit of a small mountain near Cloud City, an azure-robed young man stood with his hands clasped his back, inspecting the scenery below him. He was completely motionless, and he wore a placid expression on his face. This man was naturally none other than Han Li, who had arrived at the designated location as agreed upon. He had already been here for some time, yet the sun was only just beginning to rise up over the horizon. It appeared that he was a little early. However, it was quite rare for him to have some leisurely downtime, so his mood was quite good as he breathed in some fresh air and inspected the surrounding scenery. Less than an hour later, Han Li stirred slightly before turning toward a certain direction, and a few moments later, a streak of crimson light came hurtling toward him before also landing on the mountain's summit after just a few flashes. The crimson light faded to reveal a humanoid figure, and it was none other than Yue Zhang. Greetings, Senior Han. Sorry to keep you waiting. Yue Zhang cupped his fist in a respectful salute. It's all right, I intentionally came here a little earlier. Han Li shook his head in an indifferent manner. Yue Zhang gave him a polite smile upon hearing this, before finding a clean patch of ground nearby, and sitting down in a cross-legged manner. Meanwhile, Han Li continued to cast his gaze into the distance. Not long after that, Xianxia also arrived. Han Li raised his eyebrows slightly as she descended from above as a ball of white light, and Yue Zhang also rose to his feet. Seeing as everyone's here, let's set off right away, Han Li suggested in a straightforward manner following her arrival. He then rose up into the air as a streak of azure light, leaving Yue Zhang and Xianxia to follow along behind him. A month wasn't exactly a long time, but it wasn't a short time either. Adding to that the month or so that they were projected to spend in the Golden Devil mountain ranges, they'd be able to return to Cloud City around 3 months later if everything were to progress smoothly. And Lee continued to forge ahead as he contemplated these thoughts, and the journey proved to be quite smooth and uneventful. A month later, after flying over a long set of nameless mountain ranges, a boundless sea of azure mist appeared up ahead. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D65A, letter 1D66C, letter 1D4E, letter 1D48F, letter 1D484, letter 1D490, letter 1D4F6. That's the Azure Spirit Cloud Sea, which is the restriction around the Golden Devil mountain ranges. It's also the only entrance to the mountain ranges, and attempting to barge into the mountain ranges from anywhere else would spell certain death. A hint of excitement flashed through Yue Zong's eyes at the sight of the Sea of Mist. Han Li was flying beside Yue Zong with a contemplative look on his face as he cast his gaze toward the Sea of Mist in the distance. All of a sudden, his expression changed slightly. When they were further away, he had failed to notice this, but after drawing closer, he could hear a dull rumbling from within the azure Sea of Mist, as if a loud thunderstorm were raging within. At this moment, Yue Zong suddenly drew to a halt, and the crimson light around his body faded as he appeared before the azure mist. He flipped a hand over, and a shimmering golden badge appeared in his grasp. He then raised a hand, and the badge disappeared into the mist as a streak of golden light. The dense mist that yielded almost zero visibility suddenly parted in the face of the streak of golden light, forming a natural passageway. "Stay close to me and make sure you don't stray from this passageway. Otherwise, you'll be in big trouble," Yue Zong cautioned before flying ahead again. Even though Han Li didn't know what kind of trouble would await him if he were to fly into the azure mist, he certainly wasn't going to find out, and he followed close behind Yue Zong as he was told. Xianxia was also flying along behind them, and she couldn't help but ask, "I've also been to these Golden Devil mountain ranges once before, and if I recall correctly, shouldn't we have entered from another location? Ordinary beings would naturally have to enter from there, but I've built up a bit of reputation for myself here, so I'm exempt from that requirement," Yue Zong explained with a shake of his head. Xianxia nodded and fell silent upon hearing this. Thus, the three of them continued to fly along under the guidance of the streak of golden light, and before they knew it, they had traveled close to 10 kilometers into the Sea of Mist. All of a sudden, Han Li's eyes flashed as he suddenly caught sight of a cluster of buildings around 500 meters below them. After drawing closer, he discovered that this was a small town set up in a long and thin formation consisting of 2 rows of stone cabins. These stone cabins were all of different sizes, and there were hundreds of them down below. At the very center of a small town was a massive pavilion that was several hundred feet tall. The pavilion had a total of 5 levels, and it was quite an eye-catching structure that was constructed from massive gray stone blocks. There seemed to be some people walking along the streets of the small town, but there weren't many of them. Yue Zong let loose a low cry and headed directly toward the pavilion at the center of the small town, followed closely by Han Li and Xianxia. The three of them appeared in front of the massive pavilion almost at the exact same time, and Han Li discovered that there was a horizontal plaque hanging above the gates, which were several tens of feet tall. The words "Lightning Cloud Pavilion" had been inscribed onto the plaque in flowing and graceful ancient text. "Come with me, fellow Taoists. This is the place where we receive restriction badges. I'm sure you've been here before as well, right, Fairy Xian?" Yue Zong asked with a smile. "Indeed. However, on the last occasion that I was here, I had to go somewhere else and buy a Cloud Split badge before I could enter this place," Xianxia replied with a nod. "The Cloud Split badge that you purchased is only a temporary badge, and those expire after a month. In contrast, the treasure I just used to split apart the azure mist just then is one that can be used over and over again, and it was something that was given to me by a senior responsible for guarding this place, seeing as I came to these Golden Devil mountain ranges quite frequently. The Sea of Mist is a little troublesome to traverse, but even if you get lost in there, it won't kill you. You'll just be trapped in there for a month or two before someone from this place rescues you. What we have to do now is collect Lightning Bane umbrellas, which are the items that will truly grant us passage into the Golden Devil mountain ranges. Otherwise, the divine lightning restriction is something that even holy race beings won't be able to force their way through," Yue Zong explained before making his way toward the pavilion. The pavilion gates were wide open, and the first level was completely empty, giving off the impression that people rarely ever visited the place. After hearing Yue Zhang's introduction, Han Li nodded before also striding toward the pavilion, while Xianxia followed along behind him. The trio quickly made their way through the pavilion gates to find that there was nothing on the first level aside from a few tables and chairs. Thus, they scaled the staircase onto the second level, only to find that there was nothing there either. As such, the three of them continued up to the third level, where they discovered a white light barrier at the entrance. Yue Zhang completely ignored the light barrier and passed directly through it. Han Li raised an eyebrow before also following suit in an expressionless manner to discover that the barrier posed no impediment at all. However, Han Li's expression immediately changed slightly after emerging on the other side. After passing through the entrance, the sound of chatter and activity could be heard from above the staircase, and it seemed that there were many people on the third level. Yue Zhang and Xianxia had naturally also heard this, and expressions of surprise appeared on both of their faces, but Yue Zhang's remained unfazed as he calmly scaled the staircase first. The voices from the third level immediately cut off, indicating that the people there had also noticed Yue Zhang's arrival. At this moment, Han Li also made his way onto the third level, upon which he discovered that the level was only just over 200 feet in area, but it was packed with people. There were over 30 foreign beings in different attire sitting on the ground in a cross-legged manner, and the only other things in the room were a round stone table at the center of the room, as well as the futons of different sizes that the beings were sitting on. As soon as Han Li's trio appeared, everyone naturally turned toward the three of them. "Oh, it's Brother Yue. So you came as well, fellow Taoist Yue. Haha, I knew you wouldn't be willing to give up on this opportunity, Brother Yue." After identifying that it was Yue Zhang who had arrived, many of the beings in the room extended warm greetings toward him, and among them, there were even beings with superior cultivation bases compared to Yue Zhang. The other beings who didn't recognize Yue Zhang also stirred upon hearing his name, and some of them were appraising him with enmity in their eyes. It seemed that even though they didn't recognize Yue Zhang, he was indeed quite renowned around these parts. However, there were 4 or 5 beings in the room who displayed no reaction even after hearing Yue Zhang's name, and they were merely appraising Han Li's trio in a discreet manner. Han Li swept his spiritual senses throughout the room, and he was quite surprised that all of the beings here were at or above the deity transformation stage. In fact, close to half of them were spatial tempering stage beings, and there were even 3 beings at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage. There were also some beings who were using treasures to conceal their spiritual powers, so even Han Li was unable to ascertain their cultivation bases. In contrast to Han Li, Xianxia was rather intrigued by the resounding reputation that Yue Zhang clearly had in this place. Yue Zhang cupped his fist in a salute to everyone before heading toward a thin elderly man with gray hair, and asking in a respectful manner, "You're here as well, Senior Yan. Did something happen in the Golden Devil Mountain ranges?" This elderly man was one of the 3 beings who were at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, and he was appraising Yue Zhang with a benevolent smile on his face, seemingly closer with him than all of the other beings here. "Did you not know anything before coming to this place? Aren't you aiming to enter the Golden Devil Mountain ranges?" The elderly man was rather surprised to hear Yue Zhang's question. "I am indeed going to enter the mountain ranges, but that's for another reason. As far as I know, this is a period during which a mass influx of devilish qi is taking place, so why are there still so many people gathered here? Could it be that all of them are here for Lightning Bane umbrellas?" Yue Zhang asked with a serious look on his face. Of course, no one would come here unless they were looking to enter the mountain ranges. As for the reason behind this, that's a long story. Who are those 2 fellow Taoists?" The elderly man asked in a hesitant manner as he cast his gaze toward Han Li and Xianxia. "It's all right. Senior Han and Fairy Xian are my companions, with whom I'm going to be entering the Golden Devil Mountain ranges together, so you can tell them what you're about to tell me as well, Senior Yan. It seems that the 3 of us are the only ones here who are still in the dark." Yue Zhang chuckled with a wry smile. "That's true. Long story short, a humanoid immortal Xianxia suddenly came to our town and wounded a cultivator a few days ago, then fled into the Golden Devil Mountain ranges," the elderly man replied after a brief contemplation. "Humanoid immortal Xianxia, did I hear that right?" Zhu Zhang's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. Han Li and Xianxia also exchanged an astonished glance. There's no mistaking it. It was indeed an immortal Xianxia. While it was trying to escape, someone wounded and secured a few drops of its spirit immortal blood, which they sold in the two for a staggering amount of spirit stones, the elderly man confirmed. It's extremely rare for spirit medicines to attain human forms, and it's not necessarily the case that spirit medicines will attain sentience and a human form after existing for a certain period of time. Spirit medicines have to encounter many miraculous opportunities before they even have a sliver of a chance of attaining a human form. It seems that even in the entire spirit realm, there haven't been many precedents of such spirit medicine. If this news were to spread, all of the 13 heavenly cloud races and even beyond would surely erupt into a massive frenzy. All of these beings gathered here must have arrived after hearing this news. Yue Zhang mused with a peculiar look on his face. That's not going to be the case, Brother Yue. Perhaps more people will gather here from the 13 heavenly cloud races in the coming days, but beings from further away won't have any chances of capturing the immortal Xianxia. Not only is it proficient in 2 types of earth movement techniques, it seems to have also attained a movement ability that allows it to attain a shadow form. A young man with a clean-shaven face interjected with a chuckle. It has a shadow form. If it possesses such a legendary movement technique, then what's the point of venturing into the Golden Devil mountain ranges? With that ability, it would be impossible even for holy race beings to capture it, Xianxia exclaimed with a stunned expression. We're naturally not going to take the risk if it's only bound to be futile. This immortal Xianxia was quite unlucky in that it attacked a cultivator, who just so happened to have mastered a type of golden origin restrictive light. Even though he was caught off guard and severely wounded, his instinctive retaliative attack also struck the immortal Xianxia. When it tried to escape by adopting its shadow form, it only managed to activate the ability halfway before the restrictive light took effect, and it was forced to revert to its normal form. However, it also possesses some kind of ability that makes it insusceptible to the lightning cloud formation, and it passed directly through the restriction before escaping into the Golden Devil mountain ranges, the young man explained. After a brief pause, the young man continued in an excited manner. The cultivator who was wounded by the immortal Xianxia says that his golden origin restrictive light can prevent the immortal Xianxia from adopting its shadow form for 2 months. On top of that, due to the fact that the immortal Xianxia has his restrictive light within its body, he can refine a formation plate that can track the immortal Xianxia's location as long as one is within 50 kilometers of it. This immortal Xianxia possesses some powerful movement and concealment techniques, as well as some other special abilities, but its combat prowess is actually quite lackluster. On top of that, it's also been wounded, so there's no way that it would dare to venture deep into the Golden Devil mountain ranges, which means that it must be hiding in the outskirts. As such, this 1-month period would be ideal for capturing it. We originally had no intention of entering the mountain ranges during the influx of devilish chi, but we certainly couldn't give up on such a brilliant opportunity. As for the people outside of the 13 heavenly cloud races, even if they've received news of this, it's too late for them to get here. Han Li's trio was enlightened by this explanation. Yue Zhang contemplated the situation momentarily before a cautious look appeared on his face, and he said, "Humanoid spirit medicines are indeed extremely rare, but there are no records suggesting that they possess any special properties when it comes to pill refinement, so they may not be any more potent than other high-grade spirit medicines. The only thing special about it is that spirit medicines of this nature are extremely rare. In that case, surely it wouldn't be enough to draw so many people here in just a few days, especially during this period of devilish chi influx. After all, the mountain ranges are far more perilous during this period of time than otherwise, and even when traversing through the outskirts, there's a good chance that we may encounter powerful devilish beasts." That's the other thing that I was just about to explain, Brother Yue. On the day that the immortal Xianxia appeared, a holy race being appeared in our town and offered a reward of 3 myriad wonder pills, 3 myriad year green lotus flowers, and a massive sum of spirit stones as a reward in exchange for this immortal Xianxia, and he doesn't care if it's been captured dead or alive. This senior is currently living in the town, and he's announced that he'll only leave after the 1-month period during which the Golden Devil mountain ranges are open. By the way, that senior was also the person who purchased the few drops of blood shed by the immortal Xianxia, a beauty in a palatial dress explained. "A holy race being," Han Li repeated with a hint of surprise on his face. The woman glanced at Han Li and found him to be completely mundane and nondescript, so she replied in a slightly cold manner, "Indeed. This senior's surname is Gu, and he possesses an unfathomable cultivation base. He doesn't appear to be from our cloud city. Looks like everyone is actually here for the reward being offered by this senior gu, Xianxia chuckled upon hearing this. All cultivators who come to this town are desperately in need of spirit stones. Otherwise, no one would want to risk entering the Golden Devil mountain ranges. With such a high reward being offered, we wouldn't have to keep living in this town or risk our lives to kill devilish beasts. The woman harumphed in response, seemingly rather displeased by Xianxia's words. Xianxia merely smiled and offered no response to this. Near, don't be so rude. These two are both friends of Junior Yue's. The old man with the Yan surname seemed to be a direct senior of the woman in the palatial dress, and he scolded her in a stern manner. The woman still didn't appear to be very pleased, but she still gave an affirmative response before falling silent. Yue Zhang seemed to be confused about something else, and he looked around with furrowed brows before asking, seeing as this happened a few days ago, why are there still so many people here? Could it be that Senior Liao is no longer responsible for this place? Indeed, Brother Yue. Senior Liao departed over 10 years ago, and he was replaced by an extremely strict man. He's even brought back the old passage examination, and those who aren't able to pass the examination won't be given lightning bane umbrellas. On top of that, he's nowhere near as flexible as Senior Liao and refuses to give out lightning bane umbrellas in advance. You've actually come at just the right time, as this is the first day that the examination is being held. That's why there are so many people gathered here, the clean-shaven young man complained. That's enough. These are not matters for you to comment on. The newly appointed Enforcer Min has only reintroduced the examinations in order to bar entry to beings who are too weak, thereby preventing from entering the mountain ranges, only to be killed by the devilish beasts in there, the elderly man said in an indifferent manner. But this examination is just an outdated relic of the distant past. It was only put in place because back then, too many fellow Taoists perished in the Golden Devil mountain ranges. Now, hardly anyone is willing to venture into the mountain ranges, so such an examination is completely superfluous, the young man argued as he pursed his lips. It doesn't matter what we say. The fact of the matter is that no one can enter the mountain ranges without lightning bane umbrellas, and the one responsible for this place is no longer Senior Liao. As such, the rules will naturally be changed, the elderly man with the Yan surname said in a meaningful voice. Seeing as even the one with the highest cultivation base among them had spoken, the others naturally couldn't raise any further objections. Regardless of what you came here to do, surely you won't be willing to miss out on this opportunity, right, Brother Yue? How about we go and capture that immortal Xianxia together? With the legendary devilish beast hunter on our side, we should have a greater chance of capturing the immortal Xianxia than everyone else. After we capture the immortal Xianxia, we can split the reward between us based on individual contributions. What do you say, Brother Yue? The woman urged with a smile. Yue Zhang's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, but he didn't immediately give a reply. Xianxian could see that Yue Zhang was tempted by the offer, so she calmly reminded, Brother Yue, we don't have much time on our hands, so we can't afford to take any detours. As for the potential reward, that's something you'll only be getting if you actually capture the immortal Xianxia, whereas I've already given you half the reward that I promised to you. I'm sure you've heard the saying that a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Yue Zhang hesitated momentarily before finally making a decision. Rest assured, fellow Taoist Xian, I've already taken half the reward offered to me, so I'm certainly not going to change my mind. Senior Yan, I have another matter that I must attend to, so I won't be able to accompany you. That's all right. In all honesty, we're just trying our luck here. The outskirts of the Golden Devil mountain ranges are overly large, but it wouldn't be an easy task to find the immortal Xianxia within the devilish qi, so it's difficult to say who will find it or if anyone would find it at all. Perhaps it's one of those things where those who aren't actually searching for it will stumble upon it instead. Near, give a Junior Yue a portrait of the immortal Xianxia and a tracking formation plate. The elderly man instructed in a nonchalant manner. The woman immediately did as she was told, pulling out a white stone tablet and a blue formation plate from within her storage bracelet. After a brief hesitation, Yue Zhang still accepted the two items in the end. Thank you, Senior Yan. Don't mention it. Your father and I were good friends after all, so it's only right that I help out his beloved son, the elderly man chuckled. Meanwhile, a hint of a smile appeared on Han Li's face, and his lips twitched slightly as he transmitted his voice to the Xianxian. What's this devilish qi influx? And what's this about encountering powerful devilish beasts even in the outskirts of the mountain ranges? Xianxia's expression changed minutely upon hearing this, following which she also transmitted her voice back to Han Li in reply. Please forgive me, Senior. This devilish qi influx will indeed slightly impact our journey, but it won't pose any substantial problems unless we venture deep into the mountain ranges. I was going to explain this after we entered the mountain ranges. How about this? After we kill the holy grade devilish beast, I'll offer some of the materials derived from the beast to you aside from its true blood and devilish core. I hope you won't blame me for my oversight, Senior. As soon as Han Li raised the question, Xianxian immediately made a concession in order to appease him. Han Li was silent for a while before transmitting his voice to Xianxian again, and on this occasion, his voice had turned as cold as ice. Out of the all of things I hate, people laying traps for me stands at the top of the list. I'll let it go this one time, but if I discover something else that you've kept from me, then our collaboration is over. I do indeed want to repair the heavenly devilish armor, but I won't allow myself to be played for a fool. Despite the frosty tone of Han Li's voice, Xianxian heaved a sigh of relief as she knew that she had weathered that storm. At this moment, Yue Zong and the elderly man with the Yan surname began to chat about the past, and they seemed to be thoroughly enjoying themselves. However, right at this moment, an unexpected turn of events suddenly unfolded. As aforementioned, there were three beings at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage present, one of whom was the elderly man with the Yan surname. As for the other two, not only were they outsiders, they were among the few beings who displayed no reaction after hearing Yue Zong's name. However, after hearing the conversation that had just taken place earlier, they finally realized why Yue Zong was so renowned around these parts, and their eyes lit up in unison. After a brief conversation via voice transmission, one of them abruptly rose to his feet before making his way toward Han Li's group. This was a square-headed middle-aged man with disheveled green hair, and he said in an unfriendly voice, "So you're the renowned devilish beast hunter. You must be very familiar with the Golden Devil Mountain ranges then." Yue Zong's heart sank slightly, but he still replied in a voice that was neither humble nor arrogant. "That's in my past now. I haven't been in the Golden Devil Mountain ranges for over 100 years, so I can hardly claim to be familiar with it now. Do you need something from me, Senior?" Nice try, but that's not going to fool me. Fellow Taoist Miao and I are going into the Golden Devil Mountain ranges tomorrow to search for the immortal Xianxia, and you have to come with us, the green-haired being said in a domineering manner. Yue Zong and everyone around him couldn't help but falter upon hearing this. The elderly man with the Yan surname was able to remain calm, but his expression had darkened significantly as he asked, "What are you trying to do to, fellow Taoist?" "Nothing much. I just want to enlist the help of my little friend here. Do you have a problem?" Perhaps the green-haired being had a powerful back. In any case, he was being just as bullish and rude to the elderly man who possessed the same cultivation base as him.